Chapter 909. After confirming that there was no one nearby, the purple-striped griffin swooped down and landed on the edge of the cliff again. Meg, who had already changed out of his black robe, jumped off the griffin's back with Amy in his arms. He patted Ozzy's head with a smile and said, "Let's go back, Ozzy." How? Ozzy shook its head and looked at Meg reluctantly as if it was acting coquettishly. "Let's go back, Ozzy," Amy said as she patted Ozzy's head. Ozzy flew up into the sky with a whoosh, and circled around Meg and the others twice before rising up and disappearing into the horizon. "We should go back too." Meg retracted his gaze, and carried Amy onto the horse's back. He comforted the horse that was frightened by the griffin, and rode back to Chaos City. Amy turned to look at Meg as if she had discovered a new continent. Her little face was full of admiration, and she said, "Father, you're so awesome. Apart from cooking, you're also very good at beating up bad guys." Actually, Father has another identity, but I have too many enemies, so I can't let others know yet. Today's matter is a secret between Amy and I. You can't tell anyone else, okay? Meg said to Amy with a smile. "A secret between Father and me? Then Amy has a secret too." Amy's eyes lit up, and she nodded as she said, "I'll definitely keep this a secret." "Good girl." Meg patted her head with a smile. Ding! The restaurant's upgrade is complete. The expansion of the restaurant has been completed. According to the host's request, the accommodation area on the second floor has also been upgraded. The host's elephant food bar quota for this month has been used up. Please pay it back before the 10th of next month. The system's voice sounded in Meg's mind. "What will happen if I don't pay it back?" Meg asked curiously. "If you don't pay it back on time, your credit score will be lowered. At the same time, your elephant food bar quota will be lowered. At the same time, it will affect your credit," the system said seriously. "Of course. This system is considerate enough to introduce an installment system. Can't pay it back? That's fine. The loan will be repaid in 12 monthly installments with low interest. It will help you repay the loan easily," the host then said briskly. Meg pursed his lips. "You're not plagiarizing her flowers, are you? We're all in the financial industry. How can you say that you're copying? It's just a reference," the system emphasized seriously. Meg rolled his eyes. He couldn't be bothered with the system that was promoting all sorts of investments. Who the hell knew what those so-called investments he was making were? It was a game between a banker and a player. No matter how he played, he wouldn't be the one making money. After riding into Chaos City, Meg brought Amy to the Mercenary Guild. They didn't see anyone from the Rose Mercenary Squad, so they could only entrust an uncle in charge of the stables to return the horses to the Rose Mercenary Squad the next day. A horse was a very important companion for a mercenary. Meg had a griffin and a bicycle, so he didn't need a horse to travel. Therefore, he gave up on the idea of buying a good horse. Raising a good horse was more expensive than raising a good car. As a stay-at-home dad who lived within his means, he was already past that age. Besides, was there a better mount in the world than the purple-striped griffin? When Meg and the others came out of the Mercenary Guild, a group of mercenaries was talking loudly at the door. "Did you hear? Another mercenary group was attacked near the Giant Valley today. Does anyone know what happened?" a fat mercenary asked curiously. A middle-aged man with a goatee coughed lightly, and said, "I heard about it. I even rushed over to watch the show this afternoon, but the scene had already been sealed off by the Grey Temple when I arrived. However, I heard the exact news that the culprits had failed this time." Failed? Those guys haven't failed in this period of time. The mercenaries looked at the goatee mercenary curiously. They didn't fail because they were lucky before. However, they weren't so lucky this time because they met Alex. When they were attacking, God Alex descended and killed all of them with a sword. Not a single one of them was left. The goatee mercenary raised his voice with a hint of contempt. Alex. The mercenaries were shocked when they heard that. Then, they came to a realization. If those guys really met Alex, they naturally wouldn't have survived. It said that when Lord Alex descended, he held the heavenly lightning in one hand and waved his sword in the other. In a flash, he took the lives of those bastards. Just imagining that scene makes me excited. The goatee mercenary became more and more excited as he spoke. It was as if he was there at the scene. Meg, who happened to walk to the side, couldn't help but laugh. Holding the heavenly lightning in one hand. Did he think he was the Lightning King? This brother really should be electrocuted to wake him up a little. The goatee mercenary turned to look at Meg and said with a serious face, "Little brother, what are you laughing at? Lord Alex got rid of a big problem for us mercenaries. You have to learn to fear and respect the strong. It's because of them that we mercenaries can continue to do missions in the wilderness with peace of mind." Meg nodded with a strange expression and said, "Yes, I should respect him." "That's right." The goatee mercenary nodded with satisfaction, then turned around and continued to brag. Meg led Amy through the large square in front of the guild. Almost all the mercenaries were excitedly discussing Alex's attack. There were all kinds of fantasy and suspense versions. As someone who had experienced it himself, Meg felt that he should let them write about it. "Father, are you the person they're talking about?" After leaving the mercenary guild, Amy grabbed Meg's finger and looked up at Meg curiously. "Maybe." Meg shrugged. He didn't know the guy who held the heavenly lightning in his hand anyway. "You're amazing. They all worship you." Amy's eyes were bright, and her little face was full of pride. It was already evening when they returned to the restaurant. "Father. Did someone change the appearance of our restaurant?" Amy stood at the entrance of the restaurant and exclaimed in surprise as she looked at Amy's, which had doubled in size. "Father got someone to change it. Because there are too many customers, the original size can't fit." Meg looked at the expanded store and also showed some surprise on his face. Chapter 9-10. Meg was very satisfied with the railings and green plants. If only the 32 tables were spread out, it would look like a street food stall, which would make him feel less confident when he wrote the price of the dishes. However, after the wooden railings were installed, they did not block the view and added a touch of bourgeois taste, which was worth the price. "Mr. Mack, who did you hire to build this shop?" "I heard some clanking sounds and came over to see that it was done. I didn't even see a shadow. Isn't this too efficient?" Meg held Amy's little hand and was about to enter when Mobai came out of the blacksmith shop and looked at Meg curiously. Meg stopped and looked at Mobai with a smile. "A renovation master that I met before. He was in a hurry, so he left right after he finished. He's a magician, the kind that doesn't do proper work, but his efficiency is not bad." "Host, this system is warning you. This system is super professional." The system's angry roar sounded in Meg's mind, but Meg ignored it. "So he's a magician. No wonder." Mobai nodded with an enlightened expression. He inspected the expanded restaurant again, and turned to Mag with a smile as he said, "Boss Mag, your restaurant has doubled in size. Will it be easier for you to eat in the future? The number of customers may not be able to double in a short time, but it should be easier to line up." Meg nodded with a smile. Mobai was also troubled. Although he lived next door, he was busy forging every day. By the time he finished his work, the line was already very far away. He often couldn't eat. "That's good. Now I really miss the days when there were only 2 or 3 customers in the shop." It's not like now, where I have to look at the line in advance to eat. If I'm not careful, I'll overtake. Mabai sighed. Beautiful things are always worth looking forward to, isn't it? Meg said with a smile. That's right. In order to eat Mr. Mac's food, what's the point of queuing? Mabai also nodded with a smile. He looked left and right, then came forward and whispered, Mr. Mac, my alcohol addiction is starting to kick in. Can you give me a glass of beer? Just one glass is enough. I don't want anything else. The Mabai boss hasn't eaten yet, right? Meg asked. Yes, I just finished work and haven't eaten yet. Mabai was stunned for a moment before nodding. It just so happens that we haven't eaten yet. Why don't you come in for dinner and have a drink together? I still have to thank the Mabai boss for selling the shop to me. You're still the first customer this time. Meg opened the door of the restaurant and invited Mabai with a smile. All right, I won't stand on ceremony then. Mabai looked at Meg and laughed heartily. Meow, meow. As soon as the door opened, Ugly Duckling rushed out and jumped into Amy's arms. It meowed coquettishly, its big eyes full of grievance. All right, I got it. I'll take you there next time, but from today onward, your appetite has to be halved. Otherwise, I feel like you're going to become a fat orange that can't fly, Amy said with a serious expression as she carried Ugly Duckling in her arms. Meow, Ugly Duckling looked at Amy pitifully. There's no use begging me. I've already made up my mind. Amy turned her head away. She had no intention of changing her mind. She looked around the restaurant curiously. From time to time, she would play with the hydroponic plants that were planted in transparent glass bottles and hung on the wooden railings with hemp ropes. It was simple yet elegant. Meg went upstairs to change into his chef's uniform. He put on an apron as he walked to the kitchen. The door was pushed open, and a long professional kitchen appeared before Meg's eyes. After the expansion of the restaurant, the kitchen had also more than doubled in size. The single-person kitchen was a little cramped after all kinds of kitchenware, a large refrigerator, and a large water tank were stuffed in. In particular, it felt like he was surrounded by kitchenware when he had to cook several wok, skewers, and braised chicken at the same time. However, there were sharp and shiny knives hanging from the knife rack on the wall. The grill was placed in the corner, and the 4 wok pots were arranged in a row. All kinds of kitchenware were arranged according to Meg's habits, and he felt very comfortable. In addition to the horizontal expansion, the system had also increased the width of the kitchen by about half a meter. This way, the kitchen wouldn't be crowded even if there were 4 chefs cooking at the same time. Furthermore, there was more space for more kitchenware. Of course, the thing that attracted Meg's attention the most was the grill made of yellow mud beside the grill. It was the same model as the one he used to practice making roast duck in the test field for the god of cookery. This customization is really smart. Meg walked up to the grill and looked at it for a while, and nodded with satisfaction. There was probably no designer in this world who could understand what he wanted like the system, and it often exceeded his expectations. A large plate of roast beef kebabs, a large portion of spicy grilled fish, and a large glass of beer. Meg and Mabai drank to their heart's content and chatted for a long time. Mabai was the restaurant's first customer and neighbor. He was also Meg's first friend in this world. Meg had heard the dwarf blacksmith, who was determined to kill the giant dragon, talk about his past intermittently, but this was the first time he had heard him tell his complete story. Mabai's father was also an outstanding dwarven blacksmith, and the weapons he forged were very popular. Mabai learned from his father from a young age, and he also became a blacksmith. He married and had children, and lived a stable life. One day, a giant dragon attacked their tribe, and killed many innocent dwarves, including his father. 3 years later, he left the tribe and embarked on a journey to find that giant dragon. He couldn't stand the fact that his father and tribesmen had been killed for no reason, and he wanted revenge. Otherwise, he would never be able to rest in peace. He left for over 100 years, but still didn't find that giant dragon, nor did he return to his hometown. The war among species ended, and the Norland continent welcomed 100 years of peace, but he was still on the road to revenge. Mulby raised his head and downed the entire glass of beer in one gulp. His big brandy nose was red, and he said with a determined look in his eyes, "That damned red dragon, I'm going to kill it with my own hands." Meg refilled his glass and looked at him in silence. He didn't persuade him to go home, nor did he persuade him to let go of his hatred. Mulby's choice might not be the best, but he had never experienced it, so he had no right to judge. If it were Meg, he would probably make the same choice. "Thank you for your hospitality, Mr. Mac. When I kill that red dragon, I'll buy you a drink." Mulby was a little drunk, and he waved at the door frame before staggering toward the blacksmith's shop. Chapter 9-11. The news that Alex had saved a mercenary squad and killed all of the perpetrators was still spreading like wildfire among the mercenaries when another piece of even more exciting news began to spread. All of the elves who had been captured had been rescued. Aside from a few who had committed suicide, everyone else was still alive, and had been brought back to Chaos City from the hideout of the murderers. However, it wasn't the Grey Temple that had done all of this. Instead, it was Alex. One man, one sword, broke into the hideout alone, and killed all of the murderers. That night, the name Alex became the most talked about name in Chaos City. Some of the stories about him in the past were also dug up, and became the hottest topic of conversation. Everyone listened with great interest, and couldn't help but cheer for him. All of a sudden, everyone discovered that the world seemed to have become a lot more boring in the 3 years without Alex. Now that he was back, in less than a month's time, there were many topics that everyone liked to talk about in their leisure time. In the Battle of Rodu, 6 10th-tier powerhouses and the spatial demon Patriarch perished. Immediately afterward, he appeared in the Wind Forest, severely wounded the Elven Great Elder, and protected Irina. He then went to Chaos City and announced that he would protect all of the wandering elves. Then, on this day, he descended from the heavens again and killed all of the murderers. Even though he was a human, he was no longer just a human hero. Meg was currently holding down Ugly Duckling, which was struggling to jump out of the bathtub, with Amy. He didn't care what other people thought of him. In this world, nothing was more important than Amy, who had a bit of white foam on her nose. "Ugly Duckling, if you don't take a good bath, then don't get on my bed from now on. I don't want a stinky guy sleeping next to me," Amy said to Ugly Duckling, who was trying to climb out of the tub, with a serious expression. Ugly Duckling immediately stopped in its tracks. It looked at Amy for a while, and after ascertaining that she was serious, it withdrew its paw, and meowed in a feeble voice, "Meow, that's more like it." Amy nodded with satisfaction. She applied some shower gel on its body, and after rubbing it for a while, she turned to Ugly Duckling with a smile, and said, "Ugly Duckling, why don't you learn to swim? That way, you'll be able to save me if we fall into the water together in the future." Meow. Ugly Duckling's eyes immediately widened as if it had heard something incredible. "You're going to be very, very fat in the future. If you fall into the water, I won't be able to save you. But if I fall into the water, I won't be able to fall into the water, because I can fly," Amy with a smug look on her face. Meow. Ugly Duckling shook its little head as it slowly retreated with a fearful expression. "Of you, of course. Of course, of course, of course, of you, of course. That's more like it. Swim for me." Meg then watched as a little orange cat began to swim in the bathtub. However, due to its poor technique and lack of experience, it choked on a few mouthfuls of water. However, after learning the dog paddle style, it was able to swim quite well. After blow-drying Ugly Duckling, Meg coaxed Amy to sleep, and then went to the balcony by himself. The early winter nights were already a little cold. Meg wrapped his clothes tightly around himself, and looked up at the starry sky. Sometimes, he would wonder if there was a sun among the countless stars. It had been almost 4 months since he had come to this world. In the beginning, he had been at a loss, but now, he had opened his heart and accepted this world. This was undoubtedly a very special experience for him. Of course, if it weren't for Amy, he probably wouldn't have been able to persist for so long. Perhaps he wouldn't even have the determination to walk out of the test field for the god of cookery. After all, he was such a lazy person. This world wasn't that beautiful. The conflicts between the different races never stopped, and even he couldn't stay out of it. Meg stood silently on the balcony, and looked up at the starry sky. He began to sort out the problems that he had to face next, and the direction that he had to work toward. In 3 months, the peace treaty signed by the Northern continent 100 years ago would expire. Whether the different races chose to renew the treaty would determine whether this relatively peaceful situation could continue to be maintained. Everyone knew that the renewal of the treaty would definitely not go smoothly. After 100 years of recuperation, all the races would have their own ideas, and it would clearly not be easy to reach a consensus. Otherwise, all the races would have made an announcement after the birthday banquet of the Roth Empire, but they didn't. The possibility of an all-out war between species was very low. After all, even the powerful dragon tribe had been severely damaged in the war. However, there would definitely be a lot of local wars. It was very likely that the different races would redistribute their territories according to their power, and many innocent people would still die in the war. With Meg's current power, he naturally couldn't do anything in this matter. Even Alex couldn't do anything in the past. At most, he could make some statements in Alex's name, and let those who made the decisions know the boundaries in their hearts. The restaurant was now on the right track. After the upgrade and expansion today, the turnover should increase significantly. However, he had just spent a huge amount of gold coins to buy 2 strength points from the system. He didn't know when he would be able to earn enough money for the next strength point, so it was also very unlikely that his power would increase drastically in a short period of time. The steam engine had already been handed over to the City Lord's Castle and the Buffett Financial Group. It was equivalent to him using his patent to buy a stake in the motorcycle industry, and 20% of the steam engine's other uses. The possibility of mass production and huge profits in a short period of time was also very low. This was especially so for the construction of the railway. This was a bottomless pit. Before a stable transportation channel was formed, who knew how much money he would have to pour into it before he could reap the profits? Compared to the railway, Meg was more optimistic about the steam engine's other uses in the short term. Textiles, machinery, smelting. In all aspects of the industry, the steam engine's application space was very wide. It was a vast blue sea. Efficiency was its strongest competitiveness. Once it entered the mass production stage, it would bring him and Buffett Banks incomparably huge profits. Meg was very clear about this from the beginning. If he firmly held the steam engine in his hands and operated it properly, it would not be impossible for him to become the new richest man on the Northern continent. Chapter 9:12. Compared to Alex, who could slay dragons in the sky, catch demons in the sea, or become a business tycoon, Meg preferred his kitchen, which was full of smoke and fire. It was good to watch over the restaurant and Amy, make delicious food for the interesting customers, and listen to their heartfelt praise. He didn't have any big ambitions, not in his previous life, and not in this life. If there was something he really wanted to do now, it would probably be to go to the Wind Forest and bring Irina to Amy's aboveboard. He could feel that she was indeed very special to him. He didn't know how to express this feeling. They hadn't reached the level of lovers, but there was a kind of longing and anticipation to see her again. Could it be that she's moved? Meg muttered to himself as he looked in the direction of the wind forest. After a moment of silence, he said in his heart, "Just wait, I'll definitely come and get you. Next time, no one will be able to stop me." Meg went downstairs. The second floor had also been opened up, and the area had doubled. After the system's modification, it had completely changed. Meg's room had expanded by a third. There was a soft carpet on the floor, and the big and soft double bed made people want to lie down on it. The one-way floor-to-ceiling window could see the Aiden Square. The crib was placed next to the big bed, and Amy was sleeping soundly with Ugly Duckling in her arms. Amy's amusement park had also doubled in size. The originally cramped amusement park was now free, and she could play to her heart's content. There was also a purple-blue starry room next to the master bedroom. This was prepared by Meg for Amy. When Amy grew up, she would definitely have her own room. Now that the house had expanded, there was naturally more space to use. Meg also set up a small study in the corner. There was a table, 2 chairs, and a bookshelf full of books. The window faced the Bowtie prison. This was Meg's request. Facing the somewhat eerie prison, Meg felt that he could think calmly. Now, it really does feel like home. Meg walked around the various rooms, and a smile appeared on his face. However, it seemed that something was missing. He knew, but he didn't want to say it. As the night deepened, there were no longer any pedestrians on the streets of Chaos City. In a quiet courtyard in the north of the city, Elizabeth, who was meditating on the ice bed, suddenly opened her eyes. Her face showed a trace of vigilance. Suddenly, her expression changed. A white snowflake appeared under her body and then disappeared. Almost at the same time, the exquisite little courtyard seemed to have been kneaded inwards by some kind of terrifying power, instantly turning into a pile of broken stones and rotten wood. A loud bang was heard, and the entire street shook along with it. The residents cried out in alarm, and the children burst into tears. For a moment, the entire street was in chaos. 2 demons, one tall and one short, appeared on a big tree not far from the small courtyard. They were looking in the direction of the small courtyard. The taller demon was holding a dark crystal ball in his hand. "Is she dead?" the shorter demon asked in a hoarse voice. The taller demon looked at the ball of broken stones and wood for a while with furrowed brows. Suddenly, a burst of red light erupted from his eyes, and he angrily said, "Shit! That bitch got away. Over there." The shorter demon immediately turned around and looked at the figure in the corner. He jumped down from the big tree, and rushed toward that alley like a bouncing ball. "We only have 3 minutes. We have to go whether we succeed or not. Otherwise, those guys from the Grey Temple will make us stay here," the taller demon said coldly. He stepped forward, and instantly disappeared on the spot. In the next second, he appeared in the alley. He looked at the snowflake-like water stains on the ground, and a disdainful smile appeared on his face. The dark crystal ball in his hand lit up with a hint of red light. It transformed into a light blade, and slashed toward a certain spot in the air. A rift appeared in the air, and a muffled groan sounded. A figure stumbled, and a few drops of blood dripped from it. The rift then closed, and the figure disappeared without a trace. A hint of surprise appeared on the taller demon's face. He furrowed his brows, and stepped forward again. A series of light blades shot out from the dark crystal ball, slashing into the air. A muffled groan sounded from time to time. Who dares to be so presumptuous in Chaos City? At this moment, a muffled voice exploded like thunder, and a flying steed quickly flew in this direction. "Retreat!" The taller demon's expression changed slightly, and he instantly landed in a teleportation formation that had been set up in the alley beside the small courtyard. Although the shorter demon was unwilling to give up, he still jumped back into the teleportation formation at the sight of the flying steed. The teleportation formation was activated, and the two demons disappeared in a flash of light. A string of icicles flew down from the sky, and all of them were nailed to the teleportation formation. However, there was no trace of the two demons on it. These guys are really getting more and more arrogant. The elderly magic caster on the back of a large white bird looked at the small courtyard that had been squashed into a ball, and heaved a sigh of relief after making sure that there was no one inside. He looked at the teleportation formation that had already self-destructed, and couldn't help but grumble to himself in frustration. The elderly magic caster stood on the back of the large white bird, and yelled, "The Grey Temple has arrived. Don't worry, everyone." Dong! Yabamiya was sleeping soundly when she suddenly heard a heavy sound coming from the roof, and she immediately opened her eyes. Did something crash into the roof? Yabamiya opened her eyes in a daze. She was sure that she had heard something crash into the roof. After a moment of hesitation, she turned on the light, put on her clothes, and walked out the door. "Mia, did you hear that too?" Sally asked as soon as Yabamiya walked out the door. Did you hear it too, Aisha? I think something fell onto the roof. Should we go take a look? Yabamiya nodded. Let's go take a look. I don't think it's a bird or anything like that. Sally nodded, and walked toward the door warily. Yabamiya hurriedly followed behind her. Sally slowly opened the door, and her wand was already in her hand. Yabamiya held a frying pan in her hand, and carefully followed behind Sally. The door was completely opened, and Sally saw a figure lying on the stairs. She raised her hand and cast a small illumination spell. It's her. Chapter 9:13. A hesitant look appeared on Sally's face at the sight of Elizabeth's feeble breathing. She then turned to Yabamiya, and asked, "Mia, are you sure she's a good person?" "I'm sure. Young Mistress Elizabeth is not a bad person." Yabamiya looked up at Sally, and nodded with a determined expression. She pressed a hand over her bleeding wounds in a panic, and said in an urgent voice, "Please save her, Aisha. She's losing a lot of blood." Sally hesitated momentarily at the sight of Yabamiya's frantic expression, but she still cast a healing spell in the end. Green light fell upon Elizabeth's body, and her bleeding wounds quickly healed and scabbed over. A hint of color returned to her pale face. 10 minutes later, Sally withdrew her wand, and the green light receded. All that was left of Elizabeth's wounds were faint scars. Her face was still a little pale, but her breathing had stabilized, and she was no longer as feeble as before. "That's great, Aisha." Yabamiya was elated. She crouched down and carefully picked up Elizabeth before turning to walk into her room. "Mia, are you going to take her in?" Sally stood at the door with a perplexed look on her face. "She hasn't woken up yet, and it's so cold right now. If we leave her outside, she'll catch a cold." Mia nodded in response. Sally remained standing at the door, and looked at Elizabeth as she said, "She's a 7th-tier frost dragon. The person who injured her to this extent must be at least 8th tier or above. If they come here, we won't be able to deal with them. But we can't just leave her here. She's just a little girl." Yabamiya looked into Sally's eyes, and a smile appeared on her face as she said, "If it's possible, I'd like to keep her here until she wakes up." Sally was silent for a moment before stepping aside to allow Yabamiya into the room. "Thank you, Aisha." Yabamiya said gratefully as she carried Elizabeth, whose clothes were stained with blood, into the house and walked towards her own room. "Such a kind child." Sally sighed helplessly. She waved her hand, and a stream of water washed the blood off the door and the roof. She stood on the roof and watched for a while before returning to the house. When they walked past Yabamiya's room, Sally saw that she was carefully wiping Elizabeth's body with a hot towel. She hesitated for a moment before swallowing her words. Although this frost dragon was a little suspicious, nothing bad had happened during the few times it had been alone with Mia. And in this room, besides her, Barbara was also a 7th-level magician. Even if she really had bad intentions, she would still hesitate to take action. The wounds on her body suggested that she had been inflicted by demons, and the evil aura emanating from her body wasn't fake. However, what had happened to her? Why did those demons dare to attack a giant dragon in Chaos City? Weren't they afraid of incurring the wrath of a giant dragon? Yabamiya poured away the 3rd basin of hot water, and the blood on Elizabeth's body was finally wiped clean. She hurriedly helped her change into her own clothes. Although they were a little short, they still managed to fit her. What happened to young Mistress Elizabeth? How did she get so severely injured? Yabamiya sat on the edge of the bed, and looked at Elizabeth with a concerned expression. She looked on and on like this, and fell asleep before she knew it. The next morning, Elizabeth opened her eyes in a daze. She suddenly thought of the demons and the attack, and her eyes flew open. At the same time, she wanted to jump up. However, what she saw when she opened her eyes wasn't a terrifying demon. Instead, she saw a world of pink. She was lying on a soft bed, and a feathery but very warm blanket that covered her body. It was so comfortable that she didn't want to get up. What's this? Elizabeth faltered slightly, and didn't know what was going on. She had been attacked by a 9th-tier spatial demon and an 8th-tier demon in quick succession, and had completely lost consciousness after using her frost domain to teleport. She had thought that she wouldn't be able to escape with her severe injuries, but who would have thought that she would be lying on a warm bed after waking up? Elizabeth looked around with a wary expression, and then her gaze fell on Yabamiya, who was still sleeping on the edge of the bed. How could it be her? Elizabeth's eyes widened with shock. However, her gaze gradually softened at the sight of Yabamiya, who was sleeping on the edge of the bed. It could be seen that she had sat on the edge of the bed for a long time before finally falling asleep. Did she save me? Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya, who was lying on her side. Her long eyelashes were trembling slightly, and her intricate features were so adorable. This was the first time that she had seen her face up close, and she was sleeping like a little child. However, Elizabeth quickly realized something. She lifted the blanket and looked down. Her expression suddenly became strange. The pink pajamas she was wearing were obviously shorter, but the size was still quite fitting. It was soft and comfortable to wear on her body. All of the wounds on her body had already healed, leaving only a series of faint scars. To giant dragons, scars were nothing more than medals, so she didn't care about them at all. But why am I here? Could it be that I was teleported here during the last teleportation? Elizabeth was still a little perplexed, but thinking about it carefully, she seemed to be the only person in this massive chaos city that she could trust. Looks like Fox is already itching to kill me. Last night's assassination was only the beginning. Will I still be alive next time? In that case, should I hand over the Golden Dragon origin to you now? Elizabeth stared blankly at Yabamiya with a perplexed expression. Yabamiya had also woken up, and her eyes met with Elizabeth's as an elated expression appeared on her face. You're awake, young Mistress Elizabeth? Are you feeling better? You lost a lot of blood last night, and I was so worried about you. It's great that you're awake. I'm fine now. Elizabeth came to her senses, and a hint of panic flashed through her eyes. However, she looked at Yabamiya's concerned gaze, and a warm feeling welled up in her heart. Ever since her mother had passed away, no one had looked at her with such concern in this world. Thank you for last night, she said in a gentle voice. Chapter 9:14. My God, did Mamie's expand? It's only been a day, and it's already doubled in size. Mr. Mac is way too efficient. He completed the upgrade in just a day, and I didn't hear anything about it before. Mr. Mac is really generous. Normally, a restaurant's upgrade would take at least half a month off, but Mr. Mac only took a day off to complete it. He must have hired a magician's construction team, right? He must have spent a lot of money on this. That's not important. What's important is that the restaurant has been expanded, so it should be able to receive customers better, right? The leaders have been coming here for short meetings every day, and I've already been unable to line up for dinner a few times. The customers lining up outside Mamie's in the morning quickly noticed that the restaurant was different. Even though the curtains were lowered, they could tell from the door in the middle that Mamie's had indeed been expanded. Today's new dish is Peking duck, 100 roast ducks per night, limited to 1 per person. Only allowed for in-house meals, no takeouts. Soon, another customer noticed a new notice hanging on the door. What kind of roast duck is Peking duck? Is Peking duck a new roast duck invented by Mr. Mac? Why haven't I heard of it before? The roast duck from Dukas restaurant isn't bad either. It's crispy and delicious, but you can't eat too much of it. It's a little too sweet, but if you don't add sugar, it's a little lacking in flavor. I wonder what Mr. Mac's roast duck tastes like. In any case, I'm going to line up early tonight. After all, Mr. Mac can even make stinky tofu, so how can I miss out on the limited edition of 100 roast ducks? But 1 whole duck is going to be a lot, so I'll have to bring someone with me. The customers also began to discuss among themselves as they looked at the notice. Roast duck. Father, did you catch new ducks? Amy asked nervously when she heard that she would be able to eat roast ducks tonight. Someone else caught them. I'm just going to make roast ducks with them. Meg shook his head with a smile. Last time, Tang Wulin had secretly released the 2 tricolor ducks, so he wondered if it would release the other ducks this time. However, the system had already prepared a processed duck for him. This time, he couldn't release it even if he wanted to. Amy made her way over to Ugly Duckling, which was napping on the counter, and whispered, "Then let's be careful when we eat. Don't let Ugly Duckling see us. Otherwise, it'll be very sad. After all, its siblings might be there, and if we scare it, it might run away." Okay. Meg held back his laughter and nodded. Sure enough, a foodie would never make the same mistake twice. The roast duck stove was ready, and the roast ducks were ready to be served. The cost of 1 roast duck was 500 copper coins, so Meg naturally set the price at 20,000 copper coins. Selling 100 roast ducks a day could earn him 150,000 copper coins, which was much faster than selling Yangzhou fried rice. As for sales, Meg wasn't worried at all. This was a dish that even someone as picky as him couldn't forget, so there was no reason why it wouldn't be popular. Then can we have roast duck for breakfast? Amy asked as she turned to Meg with an expectant look in her eyes. We have to eat something light in the morning, so we'll have to wait until noon. Meg shook his head with a smile. Tang Wulin was a good girl, but she was a little impatient. All right. Amy nodded. Even though she was a little disappointed, she didn't express any displeasure at all. Boss, I'm here. Phyllis knocked on the door. Meg opened the door to find Phyllis standing there in a brand new chef's suit. Her cheeks were slightly flushed, and her breathing was a little unsteady. She looked at Meg with an apologetic expression as she said, I'm sorry, boss, but the bed is too soft. Am I late? Meg looked at his watch and nodded as he said, You're 15 minutes later than we agreed on yesterday. However, it's your first day at work, so it's normal that you're not used to it. I hope you'll be more punctual next time. Yes, I will. Phyllis nodded earnestly with a blush on her face. Before going to bed last night, she had decided that she had to arrive early today, but she didn't expect that she would oversleep and run all the way here. Meg stepped aside to let Phyllis in with a smile as he said, "Come on in. As long as everything goes smoothly, you shouldn't be too late." As a boss, he couldn't just spoil his employees. Being punctual was the most basic of all. The restaurant was very crowded at the moment, and if someone couldn't be punctual, it could greatly affect the restaurant's normal operations. All right. Phyllis hurriedly entered, and was stunned to see that the restaurant had completely changed. She hadn't been here for a day, but the restaurant had doubled in size. There were even wooden fences that reached up to her chest separating the rows of tables. There were small bottles of green plants hanging on the fences, and the comfortable warm lights made her feel warm and comfortable. "Good morning, big sister Phyllis," Amy said with a smile as she pinched Ugly Duckling's chubby face. "Good morning, Amy." Phyllis came to her senses and greeted Amy before hurriedly catching up with Meg, who was almost at the entrance of the kitchen. Standing at the entrance of the kitchen, Phyllis was stunned again. If the previous kitchen was said to be the pinnacle of a one-man kitchen, then Meg was like a master of a generation. However, there was no second person who could integrate into the kitchen, as that would break the harmony. However, the current kitchen was even more grand and spacious. It had more than doubled in size, and the kitchen utensils had been rearranged. The sink, the cutting area, the cooking area. All of the areas had also become more spacious, and it wouldn't be crowded even if 3 or 4 chefs were to work here at the same time. The white lights weren't glaring, but at this moment, the kitchen was a little dazzling in Phyllis's eyes. This is a real kitchen. Phyllis's heart was screaming. She suddenly felt that the kitchen that she was so proud of didn't even deserve to be called a kitchen in comparison. Meg turned to Phyllis and said, "These are the ingredients that we'll be using today. I'll process some of them, and you can take care of the rest. Due to the expansion of the restaurant, I need to increase the efficiency of my cooking. If I need new ingredients later, you have to prepare them for me." "Huh? Yes, I'll do my best." Phyllis faltered slightly before immediately coming to her senses. She quickly strode into the kitchen, washed her hands, and began to process the ingredients. Chapter 9:15. It was a misty morning in the Wind Forest. In a luxurious hall, a middle-aged elf looked at Borg with a worried expression, and said, "Master Borg, Irina and those mysterious guys killed all of the mercenaries who were escorting the elves, and we lost over 100 slaves. Yesterday, Alex destroyed a mercenary group with an 8th-tier powerhouse in Chaos City. I'm afraid it's going to be even more difficult for us to get more slaves. Even though Alex has died once, he's still as annoying as he was back then." Borg's expression darkened as he sat on a tall chair. He crushed a cup in his hand, and said in a low voice, "Raise the bounty, and warn those guys not to sell the slaves to other places. If we find out, they'll pay a heavy price. Elves can only be sold to the Wind Forest. If anyone forgets, get someone to remind them." "Yes." The elf's expression changed, and he bowed before quickly departing. How long can the Tree of Life last? I'm really looking forward to that power. When that time comes, the Wind Forest will have to crawl at my feet, including that noble queen. Borg raised his hand, and a ball of green flames danced in his palm. A series of greenish-black patterns spread down his arm and reached his wrist. "Alex, I'll kill you with my own hands." Borg's eyes suddenly turned crimson, and the flickering shadows in the flames made him look like the shadow of a demon. The cave where the Tree of Life was located was still covered by a pale green light curtain. The spring that usually gushed out the spring of life had completely dried up, and the surrounding trees had lost some of their green color. They no longer had the vitality of the past. The elven Holy Land had become a forbidden area. Elves were told not to approach this place, or they would be punished. There were only 2 teams of elven guards patrolling the area. After the elven queen went into seclusion, a series of changes occurred in the elven race. Princess Irina was stripped of her position as the princess, but her words were like a seed that had taken root in the hearts of the young elves. During this period of time, many young masters and young ladies of noble families had been beaten and confined. Although the news that spread was that they had made small mistakes and were punished lightly, everyone knew in their hearts what the reason was. Some changes that made the adults uneasy were happening, and it was the successor that they had painstakingly cultivated. The cave of the Tree of Life was as quiet as ever. Without Phyrus, it was even quieter than before. Irina was still sitting under the Tree of Life in a long white dress. Her eyes were closed, and she was in a state of meditation. A green beam of light rose from her body, and connected with the Tree of Life. However, at this time, there were dark green cracks on the trunk of the Tree of Life. They spread from the roots and occupied almost half of the height. Traces of dark green aura were emitted from the cracks and continued to spread upward. The tens of thousands of drooping tender green branches were now a little more yellow, no longer exuding vitality. However, the Tree of Life's powerful life force and the green beam of light that Irina had injected into the Tree of Life were still resisting, and a balance was reached. Borg has indeed betrayed the god of life and allied himself with the undead. How dare he touch the Tree of Life? After a long while, Irina opened her eyes. The light on her body gradually faded. She needed a short rest to recover some of her spiritual power. Bean sprout, I want a cup of. Irina said casually, but then she suddenly stopped. She looked at the empty cave, and shook her head with a smile. The little guy that she had picked up when he was little, and had never left the Wind Forest until now, was probably in Chaos City right now. With Meg taking care of him, she was quite relieved. Irina looked up at the Tree of Life and sighed. Hang in there, old friend. If you fall, the entire elven race will be finished. The god of life won't protect the elves who have been tainted by the undead. You are the bottom line. The withered yellow branch swayed slightly in response to Irina's words. A smile appeared on Irina's face. She got up and walked around the cave before sitting down again. She closed her eyes, and softly said, "Rest for an hour, and then we'll continue to expel those undead auras. I've already found some tricks. Those guys are far more afraid of the holy light than the power of life. That tree isn't producing water of life anymore. Isn't that hindering my farming? I need a lot of rice of life every day. The current stock can only last for 3 months at most. A batch of early maturing rice takes 2 months from planting to harvesting, so I have to get it to produce water again within a month. Those things are so annoying. If it weren't for the fact that the heavenly Tao doesn't allow them to affect the normal development of the world, I would have destroyed them all with a beam of gamma rays so that they wouldn't affect my farming and earning money." In the depths of Meg's mind, the system was mumbling to itself, but no one could hear it. Although I can't do it directly, it shouldn't be a problem to fertilize the tree, right? As a master chef cultivation system, my mission is to assist the host to become a successful master chef. If I can't guarantee the supply of the rice of life, the dish Yangzhou fried rice will be completely ruined. This is something that can never happen. Yes, this is completely in line with the 3 laws of the system. Expelling the undead aura is not something a system can do. But now, let's analyze the composition of these guys. As long as they exist, they can be explained by science. If they can't be explained, then it must be because science isn't developed enough. Phyllis once again demonstrated her superb knife skills. The flying ingredients were quickly turned into spare ingredients of the same size with the help of the Chinese kitchen knife. Meg didn't stay idle either. In addition to cutting the ingredients, he also had to prepare many ingredients himself, such as the sauce for the beef kebab and the marinating of the beef. However, compared to usual, Meg's workload had been reduced by more than half, which made him very satisfied. Not long after, Sally and Yabamiya also came to the restaurant. Chapter 9:16. Yabamiya looked at Meg with a hesitant expression. Meg stopped what he was doing and looked at Yabamiya seriously. It seemed that something really did happen last night. Sally also looked at Mia, but she didn't say anything. Yabamiya looked at everyone's concerned expressions and hesitated for a moment before shaking her head with a smile. "It's nothing. I just didn't sleep well and had a nightmare." Meg took a meaningful look at Yabamiya before nodding and saying, "All right, then. If you need any help, make sure to let us know. You don't have to open the ice cream shop today. Go back and get some sleep after the morning service." "Okay." Mia nodded with a smile. She felt a warmth in her heart as she thought to herself, although I don't know what kind of enemy Miss Elizabeth has provoked, it's best not to let Boss and the rest worry. She can't get out of bed now, so I'll bring something back for her after the morning opening hours. What a naive little girl. I hope that frost dragon isn't a bad person. Sally looked at Mia and sighed in her heart. Mia stood at the entrance of the kitchen and asked curiously, "By the way, boss, the notice outside said that you'll be releasing a new dish today, Peking duck. When did you come up with a new dish? But where is the duck?" Everyone looked at Meg. They were just as curious as the customers in the line outside. Every time Meg released a new dish, it would completely overturn everyone's expectations. Therefore, every new dish he released was very curious. Yes, the duck is still on the way. The Peking duck will be officially released tonight. It's a little inappropriate to eat it in the morning, so I'll make a roast duck for everyone to try at noon. Meg nodded with a smile. It was better to eat something light in the morning. No matter how good the roast duck was, it wasn't suitable for breakfast. The happiest thing about being a waitress at Mamie's is to be able to eat a new dish first every time. Mia clasped her hands with a blissful expression. She then looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Boss, next time when you come up with a new dish, I can try it for you. I can eat anything." Smiles appeared on everyone's faces. This was probably something that everyone had dreamed of. Even I don't have the courage to try my dishes. Meg shook his head with a smile. Besides, I can eat a lot of them. A burst of laughter in the restaurant. Even Sally couldn't help but cover her mouth with her hand and giggled. Phyllis, who was still cutting vegetables in the kitchen, saw this scene. She couldn't help but look at Meg. She suddenly felt very lucky. Whether it was Princess Irina or Boss Meg, they didn't bully her because of her identity and status. Such a relaxed and pleasant working environment was completely unimaginable in the Wind Forest. Of course, Miss Sally, who had been nominated as a candidate for the princess, volunteered to be a waitress here. Now that Princess Irina had been abolished, Miss Sally was the most likely to become the new princess. Everyone thought she was cultivating in seclusion in the Brewster family, but she was actually in Chaos City. Sally also took a glance at Phyllis. She had disguised herself the day before to gather some information, and she was caught off guard by the drastic changes that had taken place in the elven race. She had initially wanted to have a chat with Phyllis the day before, but Phyllis had locked herself in her room for the entire day. Princess Irina had been dethroned, and the elven queen was in seclusion. Now, in the Wind Forest, one party led by the most powerful general, Borg, and the other party led by High Priestess Helena were in a power struggle. Although the possibility of a civil war wasn't high, it was very likely that a new princess would be elected, and she might have to leave Chaos City and return to the Wind Forest. The two looked at each other, and then silently looked away. During breakfast, Yabamiya stood and bit into a rugiamo. After a moment of hesitation, she looked at Meg and said, "Boss, can I have a sweet tofu pudding to take away later?" Sweet tofu pudding. Meg looked at Mia with surprise. This girl had always only eaten savory tofu pudding. Now, she had betrayed him and become a sweet fan. Meg couldn't help but forget about the other important thing, which was to take it away. I want to try sweet tofu pudding today, but I'm still a savory fan. But as a savory fan, if I don't try sweet tofu pudding, I won't be able to say anything more convincing, right? Maybe that's what it is. Yabamiya's eyes darted around as she tried to come up with an excuse that sounded convincing to her. Meg nodded with a smile and said, "Okay, I'll save a portion for you later, and then you can take it away." Seeing this girl trying so hard to make up a lie, he didn't have the heart to expose her. Something did happen last night, but Mia didn't want to talk about it, so he didn't ask. Everyone in this world had secrets. He was just a boss, and didn't have a strong desire for knowledge and control. "Thank you, boss," Mia said happily with a happy expression. After breakfast, Meg stood up and looked at everyone with a smile, and said, "The restaurant is limited to 400 people this morning, and the number of diners has increased by 100. The opening hours are the same, which means that the workload has increased by a third, so we need to be more efficient and work harder. I hope everyone can work hard. I'm sure we can do it well." Mia nodded with confidence. Sally and Barbara's eyes were also burning with fighting spirit. They had been able to do their job well before, but now that the number of customers had increased, they had to take it seriously. "Is there anything I can help with?" Phyllis, who was sitting in a corner and didn't have much of a presence, asked meekly. "You'll be in charge of helping in the kitchen. When you learn how to make beef kebabs, you'll be busy," Meg said with a smile. The increase in the number of diners was undoubtedly a big surprise to the customers who arrived late. Many of the customers who had been waiting outside of the 300th place line happily continued to line up. "Welcome to Mamie's." Meg pushed open the door and smiled at the customers who were waiting in line. Mamie's had changed its appearance, and it was displayed to all the customers. "Wow, it's so much bigger, and there's even a little more partitioning. There's no section, and it's even more tuned. Mr. Mac is really a genius. I didn't expect this kind of flower to be nourished with water. But this little crystal vase must be super expensive, right? It's just hanging here like a vase." Chapter 9:17. On a mountain 5 kilometers away from Chaos City, a giant jade-top falcon landed quietly. Two figures stood on the top of the mountain, looking in the direction of Chaos City. A middle-aged elf looked at Elliot worriedly, and said, "Chief, you've come to Chaos City in person. If the other families know about this, it'll be hard to explain." Elliot shook his head with a grave expression and said, "Aside from me, who else can bring Sally back? The most important thing now is not to worry about those guys attacking me for coming to Chaos City. Instead, it's to think of a way to bring Sally back and make her the new elven princess. That's the only way the Brewster family can survive the coming chaos." The middle-aged elf wanted to say something, but hesitated. In the end, he sighed deeply and didn't say anything. "Wait for me here. I'll bring her back before sunset tomorrow. Don't provoke anyone, and keep a low profile." Elliot gave the middle-aged elf some instructions, and then appeared at the foot of the mountain in a flash. He quickly flew toward Chaos City. An increase of 100 customers might not seem like a big deal at first, but when the restaurant doubled in size due to the already tight operating hours and the addition of 100 customers, the workload was not as simple as increasing by 1/3. Even with the help of magic, the three people running back and forth between the restaurant and the kitchen still felt that their legs and hands were no longer their own. After breakfast, Harrison smiled at Meg, who was cooking in the kitchen, and said, "Mr. Mac, I think you should hire a few more waitresses. Look at how tired the girls are. How can you be so cruel to them? If possible, I'd like to hire 2 more chefs." Meg rolled his eyes. He shook the wok slightly, and the Yangzhou fried rice in the wok jumped out like a rainbow. If he hadn't leveled up twice in the past 2 days and improved his strength, he wouldn't have been able to handle this amount of work. 1 person. "Mr. Mac, you win." Harrison poked his head into the kitchen to take a look. In such a huge kitchen, there was enough food for 400 people, but it was all made by Mag alone. He couldn't help but stick out his tongue. When this chap decided to be ruthless, he would even exploit himself. He had nothing to say. After the morning opening hours, Meg rotated his sore wrist and looked at the tired girls lying on the chairs outside. He couldn't help but smile. His conscience wouldn't be at ease if he didn't give them a raise. "Here's a warm towel for you." Meg was still thinking about how much he should give them when a hot towel was handed to him. Meg was stunned for a moment. Looking at Phyllis, who was holding the towel with both hands, he hurriedly took it and nodded. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Phyllis ran out of the kitchen with the rest of the towels and handed them to Mia and Sally. "What a kind girl." Meg withdrew his gaze and covered his face with the hot towel. The steam from the towel swept away all his tiredness. It was so comfortable that he wanted to close his eyes and sleep. A hot towel relieved a lot of everyone's tiredness, and they looked at Phyllis with more gratitude and affection. "Well, I'll leave now. I'll leave the rest to you guys." Yabamiya helped put all the dishes into the kitchen. She picked up the sweet tofu pudding that Meg had packed for her and was about to leave. "Mia, here's a plate of Yangzhou fried rice. I made too much just now. You can take it with you." Meg stopped her and handed her a lunchbox with a smile. Mia turned back to look at the lunchbox in Mag's hand. Her eyes were already slightly red. She went forward to receive the lunchbox, and then bowed deeply to the buyer. She choked up a little as she said, "Thank you, boss. Go on. Go back and have a good sleep, but remember to set an alarm. Don't miss the lunch service," Mag urged as he stroked Mia's hair with a smile. "Okay, I'll remember." Mia nodded. She picked up the lunchbox and walked quickly out of the door. Mag looked at the fatigued Sally and Babla with a smile, and said, "You two should get some rest as well. It's time for me to think about how to recruit a few more exceptional employees. It's not good to let beauties work so hard. Then I'm afraid it'll be hard to find them." Barbara curled her lips. "I agree." Meg nodded in agreement. After all, there weren't that many 7th-tier spatial magic casters in this world who could be tricked into working as waiters with beef kebabs. However, Meg urgently needed to think about this problem seriously. He had to accept the fact that Sally could be taken away by the Brewster family at any time. As someone who had experienced it himself, he knew how important Sally was in the current situation of the elven race. As long as the leader of the Brewster family wasn't an idiot and didn't know that Sally was in Chaos City, then it was very likely that he was already on his way to Chaos City. If Sally suddenly left, Amy's would be in a state of sudden suspension. Therefore, he had to think of a solution now. It wasn't difficult to find a 7th-tier water magic caster in Chaos City, but Mag didn't think he had the ability to poach a 7th-tier water magic caster from the Grey Temple or some veteran mercenary group to work as a waiter in his restaurant. Therefore, this was a very troublesome matter. Of course, there was still a solution. He could find a slightly weaker water-type magic caster, but at the very least, he would be able to clean the entire restaurant. Then, he could find a cashier who was good at arithmetic, and 2 waiters who were more agile to clean up the dishes. That should be enough to fill Sally's vacancy. Now that I think about it. Am I really an evil capitalist who exploits people? Meg raised an eyebrow. He was still a little troubled. The restaurant would become a little messy when there were too many people. This was a problem he didn't want to see, but he had to solve it. All right. Looks like I have to talk to that Mediterranean boss more often during this period of time. At least, I have to find a few reliable ones, Mag thought to himself with resignation. Meg suddenly looked at Phyllis. He walked to the counter, took out a few gold coins, and handed them to Phyllis. By the way, Phyllis, go to the market and buy some beef today. Bring it back and continue to practice your beef kebabs according to what I taught you yesterday. Phyllis was a little hesitant, but she quickly nodded when she saw Meg's eyes. She clutched the gold coins tightly and walked out. After cleaning up the restaurant, Sally and Barbara also left the restaurant to rest. They weren't used to the workload in the morning, so they needed to rest. Meg went upstairs to change his clothes. He was about to go to the job market. As soon as he opened the door, he saw Luna standing outside. She was about to knock on the door. "Teacher Luna, why are you here?" Meg asked in surprise. Chapter 9:18. A Parent-Teacher Conference. Meg faltered slightly upon hearing this. He suddenly recalled that Amy had mentioned a parent-teacher conference to him the day before yesterday, but he had completely forgotten about it due to his busy schedule. Furthermore, Amy was currently studying magic with Crassus and Julian, so he didn't think that Luna would be the one to notify him. Luna seemed to have detected the confusion in Meg's eyes, and she smiled as she said, "That's right. The students of Chaos School have to hold a parent-teacher conference every semester. Amy is currently studying magic with 2 magic casters, but the school assigned her to my class as her homeroom teacher, so I'm here to notify you that you'll be attending the parent-teacher conference tomorrow." Meg immediately nodded and said, "I see. Thank you, Teacher Luna. What time will the conference be held tomorrow?" "I'll be sure to be there on time. The exact time will be between 1:30 p.m. and 4:30 p.m. tomorrow." Luna looked at Meg with a hesitant expression and said, "The school wants both parents of your child to be present at the parent-teacher conference." Meg looked at Luna's hesitant expression with a smile and said, "Amy has also mentioned this to me before, but I didn't receive any specific notice, so I can take care of it." Luna looked at the smile on Meg's face and felt an inexplicable sense of security. A smile also appeared on her face, and she nodded as she said, "All right, Mr. Meg, I'll see you tomorrow." "See you tomorrow." Meg nodded with a smile. Aisha won't refuse, right? If she refuses, then it doesn't seem right for Phyllis to go. But no matter what, it's better than Blower. Meg murmured to himself as he looked at Luna's departing figure. Meg, who was about to go to the talent market with his bicycle, suddenly stopped. He rubbed his eyebrows and said, "I almost forgot that the Catering Association's gourmet ranking competition is going to start in 2 or 3 days. We have to figure out the eggplant with garlic sauce as soon as possible. Otherwise, the vegetarian category will be useless. System, why don't you give me a recipe for eggplant with garlic sauce?" Meg tried asking in his mind. "The system is in closed-door cultivation to research fertilizer. Please do not disturb." A line of words silently floated across Meg's mind. "Meg, I don't believe you." Meg cursed silently in his heart. He rode his bicycle and went to the talent market. There were all kinds of people from different races, and he was a little dazzled by them. However, he didn't see a single one that he liked. When he came out of the talent market, Meg had already recognized a fact: he was also someone who cared about appearances. Even if he was innocent. However, when he looked at the cleaning ladies who were slightly inferior in terms of looks, he couldn't make up his mind to hire them to Mamie's. On the way, Meg went to the Broad Recruitment Agency. He found the owner of 2 Pieces, Chris, and asked him to help him find a suitable candidate. Even though he was feeling as if he had suffered a loss from the previous transaction, Chris was still a smooth and slick businessman. He didn't express any displeasure toward Mag in the slightest, and he followed all of the necessary procedures. However, Mag's demands were quite complex and demanding, so he asked for double the commission. As long as I'm satisfied with the person, double the commission won't be an issue. Meg nodded with a smile. With the popularity of your restaurant, Mr. Mack, if you put up a recruitment notice on the door, I'm sure many people will come to apply. Chris accepted the letter of entrustment with a smile. That's a good idea. Meg's eyes lit up, and a thoughtful look appeared on his face. There were many customers who said they would work for free as long as they were given a meal, and there were many outstanding talents among them. Chris's suggestion opened up a new line of thought for Meg. He patted Chris on the shoulder with a smile, and said, "Thank you, Mr. Chris." Then, he turned and walked out of the restaurant. Chris's expression completely froze. He looked at Meg's back as he rode away on his bicycle, and he wanted to slap himself. Why did he say that? After that, Mag went to the market. There were eggplants in this world, too. However, compared to the eggplants on Earth, the ones on the Norland continent were larger. They were about the size of a winter melon. It was said that they had been discovered in the territory of the forest trolls. Apart from their size, they tasted just like the eggplants on Earth. This grilled eggplant should be enough for a table of people. Meg picked up a large purple eggplant from a stall on the ground. It weighed over a dozen kilograms, and he was stunned. The middle-aged man who was leaning against a rattan chair was immediately energized when he saw Meg carrying the eggplant. He smiled and said, "Young man, this is an eggplant that I grew in my own house. It's definitely the largest eggplant in our village, and it's cheap too. It's only 10 copper coins for such a large eggplant. If you want more, I can give you a lower price. Less than a copper coin per kilogram. It's really cheap." Mag thought to himself. However, due to the limitations of cooking methods, other species, apart from the forest trolls, generally stayed away from eggplants, which were soft and had a strange taste. This was also the reason why this old farmer had a small mountain of eggplants in front of him, but it was almost unmarketable. Meg picked 3 eggplants that looked good, and handed 3 silver coins to the owner. "I don't want too many, so I'll take these 3. I'll come back next time. Buy some more. If you buy 5 eggplants, you'll get 1 free." The owner took the money and tied the 3 eggplants up with a straw rope for Meg as he continued to sell them. It seemed that even the forest trolls didn't like eggplants this year. This made him very worried, and now he was trying to sell as many eggplants as he could. He couldn't let them all rot in the field. "I'll come back tomorrow." Meg shook his head and left with the 3 eggplants, which weighed over 40 kilograms. These were enough for him to try cooking today. The most important thing now was to make the bean paste. The bean paste played a crucial role in determining the authenticity of a dish of eggplant with garlic sauce. A good bean paste was half the battle won. When Meg was buying spices, he happened to see Phyllis, who was still pacing back and forth in front of the beef stall. Seeing her carefully selecting the beef, he didn't greet her. Instead, he watched her for a while and went back with the eggplants and spices. Choosing and purchasing ingredients was a very important ability, and also the foundation of becoming a chef. Phyllis had to master it independently. Chapter 9:19. Meg was constantly trying to make the bean paste, while Phyllis was also trying her best to grill a kebab. In the quiet kitchen, only the occasional sigh of the two could be heard. But soon, the two of them were immersed in their next failure. In this regard, the two of them found a trace of similarity. So behind every delicious dish, there is a process of continuous improvement. Becoming an excellent chef is not an easy thing. I also have to continue to work hard. Phyllis thought to herself as she stole a glance at Meg. At noon, Meg started the fire and roasted Mamie's first roast duck. There were 2 thin plates of lotus leaf pancakes, several long and small plates with thin strips of scallion and cucumber, and a plate of sweet sauce in front of everyone. Everything looked so delicate and exquisite, making people look forward to it even more. There were no other dishes on the table. Everyone sat at the table and looked in the direction of the kitchen, full of expectation. The most anticipated moment was naturally the moment when a new dish was brought to the table, and they would be the first to witness and taste it. Meg slowly walked out of the kitchen with a small dining cart. There were several exquisite plates on the cart, a round wooden chopping board with a heavy Chinese kitchen knife on it, and a large plate with a metal lid in the middle. It stopped at the table. Everyone's eyes fell on the large plate with a lid. They had seen Meg working for a long time, but they had all kinds of guesses as to what the roast duck looked like. But what they wanted to see the most was what Meg made. "Peking duck," Meg said with a smile, and then gently lifted the metal lid. Under the lid was a plump, bright red roast duck with a slightly oily surface. A complete duck was roasted so beautifully that everyone's eyes couldn't help but light up. The roast duck that had just been taken out of the oven was still steaming hot, and a rich aroma came with the heat. It was a mouth-watering smell. Gulp. Everyone's throat moved uncontrollably. "It smells so good. This aroma is completely different from that of beef kebabs, but it's also so fragrant that I'm salivating," Yabamiya exclaimed after taking a deep whiff of the aroma. "Father, there's only one roast duck, but there are so many of us. How are we going to split it?" Amy looked at Meg with a troubled expression. Everyone turned to look at Meg. One roast duck was supposed to be shared among 6 people, so how to cut it became a problem. Roast duck is 70% roasted and 30% sliced. Therefore, slicing the duck is a very important process. Meg said with a smile. He put on a pair of thin disposable gloves, lifted the roast duck from the big plate, and placed it on the chopping board. He held the kitchen knife and made a cut on the duck breast. With a light flick of his wrist, thin pieces of duck meat fell neatly on the chopping board. The duck meat was lean with a hint of fat, and the duck's skin was golden yellow. After cutting it open, it had beautiful texture. All of them were sliced into the shape of apricot leaves. They were almost the same size, and there was no difference in thickness. They were as light as leaves, and they were stacked in an orderly manner on the chopping board. The cumbersome kitchen knife appeared to be very nimble in Meg's hands. The crispy duck skin and tender duck meat didn't affect the stability of the kitchen knife in the slightest. Under his knife, the entire duck was quickly sliced into pieces according to its different parts, and placed on different plates in a smooth and fluid manner. Amy's eyes widened as she stared intently at the plates of roast duck meat. The light in her eyes made it seem as if she was about to pounce on them. What incredible knife skills! Phyllis's mouth was also slightly agape, and her eyes were filled with amazement. Without the aid of any magic, and with only pure knife skills, the roast duck that had just been taken out of the oven had been sliced into such a thin and uniform piece. She was truly in awe. Even if she had the assistance of wind magic, she probably wouldn't be able to do it as well or as quickly as Meg. Sally and Yabamiya also couldn't hide their amazement. The roast duck's alluring color was sliced apart by Meg's knife, and the entire process seemed to have given the duck a soul. Looking at the uniform thickness of the duck meat on the plates and smelling the fragrance in the air, they felt as if they could already taste the enticing taste of the duck meat once it entered their mouths. Their expectations were raised to the extreme. 108 slices. Meg put down the duck rack in his hands, and a smile appeared on his face as he looked at the 5 plates of duck meat that were perfectly filled. Slicing a duck into 108 slices was the perfect number of slices. Only an experienced duck slicer could achieve this. The thickness of the duck slices was just right, and it was also one of the projects that Meg had spent the most time on in the test space for the god of cookery. Slicing roast duck was truly a work of skill. "Father, can we start eating now?" Amy asked as she looked at Meg expectantly. "Of course, but before we start eating, I have to tell everyone how to eat roast duck." Meg looked at the impatient Amy with a doting expression. "The roast duck meat can be eaten directly, or you can dip it in the sweet sauce in front of you. Of course, the most classic way to eat it is to dip the duck meat in the sweet sauce, add some green onions and cucumbers, and wrap it in a layer of lotus pancake." Everyone's eyes fell on the sweet sauce and green onions in front of them, as well as the lotus pancake on the bamboo plate. They didn't know that these things could be used in such a way. They didn't think that eating roast duck would require so much attention. "Everyone is hungry, so let's start eating," Meg said with a smile as he looked at everyone, who had already swallowed countless mouthfuls of saliva. "Okay." Amy was the first to reach out with her chopsticks. She picked up a piece of duck meat with trembling hands, and put it into her mouth. A blissful expression instantly crept onto her delicate little face. The delicacy melted in her mouth. It was the taste of bliss. So this is what roast duck tastes like. Then, roast goose must taste similar, right? It's so delicious. Amy said happily as she opened her eyes. "I want to try it too." Yabamiya picked up a piece of duck meat and carefully dipped it in the sweet sauce in front of her. Then, she put it into her mouth and gently bit into it. The duck meat that had just been sliced was still piping hot, and the skin was crispy. Meanwhile, the lean duck meat with a hint of fat was exceptionally rich and mellow. A fruity aroma slowly spread from the duck meat, and the sweet sauce's aroma began to spread, raising the deliciousness of the dish to another level. Yabamiya closed her eyes at some point. She seemed to see the duck slowly being roasted into a golden red color in the fruit charcoal. A drop of oil seeped out of the duck, then slowly slid down the golden red skin and dripped into the charcoal fire, raising a small flame. Chapter 9:20. Yabamiya opened his eyes and exclaimed, "Is this really a roast duck? I don't smell any rank odor. The crispy duck skin and the smooth duck meat don't seem to belong to the same duck at all. This taste is simply unbelievable. Then let me try to wrap the duck in a lotus leaf cake." Sally carefully picked up a lotus leaf cake from the small bamboo plate. It was as thin as a piece of paper and almost translucent. It looked like a lotus leaf when it was spread open. It was very beautiful and even a little warm to the touch. "Can this thin pancake really cover the roast duck and the side dishes?" Sally was a little worried. She was afraid that she would break the cake if she didn't sprinkle enough. She carefully spread the cake on the plate in front of her. Then, she picked up a piece of roast duck and dipped it in the sweet sauce. She then picked up 2 green onions and 2 cucumbers and placed them on top of the roast duck meat. After that, she carefully folded the cake from the 4 sides to the center and turned it into a plump cube. Sally picked up the lotus leaf pancake that was wrapped around the duck meat with a look of surprise in her eyes. This thin lotus leaf pancake had incredible tenacity, and it didn't show any signs of damage even after wrapping so many things around it. "It's perfectly wrapped. It's the most delicious one piece at a time," Meg said with a smile as he looked at the roast duck wrapped in the lotus leaf cake in Sally's hand. Sally hesitated for a moment after hearing that. Then, she put the duck meat wrapped in the lotus leaf cake that was a little too big into her mouth. The soft skin had a hint of fragrance. After biting into it, the roast duck hidden in the lotus leaf cake began to show its charm. The crispy duck skin and tender duck meat melted in the mouth at the same time, and the rich fragrance spread in the mouth. The more he chewed, the more obvious the fragrance became. The taste buds on the tip of her tongue were completely activated. She greedily sucked on the delicious taste. The green onions were bitten open, and the sweet sauce enhanced the fragrance of the duck meat, making it even more alluring. After the deliciousness wreaked havoc, the cucumber strips that had been almost ignored before began to show their charm. The fresh cucumber made a light crunching sound when bitten, and the trace of greasiness brought about by the sweet sauce and roast duck was completely eliminated. After swallowing it, only a lingering fragrance lingered in the mouth, and it was incomparably refreshing. Sally savored the aftertaste for a while before looking up at Mag. What a special flavor. The biscuit is as thin as paper, the delicious roast duck is slightly piping hot, and the fresh onions and cucumber are all very different things. However, the combination is irresistible, and it's not greasy at all. Roast duck is so delicious. Amy mumbled. She then turned to Ugly Duckling, who was lying on the table and looking at them with curiosity in its eyes. She smiled and said, "Ugly Duckling, you have to grow up quickly too." Meow. Ugly Duckling felt a chill run down its neck, and it instinctively took a few steps back. It stepped on the edge of the counter, and fell off with a thump, drawing raucous laughter from everyone. The delicious roast duck brought unparalleled enjoyment and laughter to the crowd. Meg also picked up a piece of roast duck and carefully tasted it. The flavor, meat, texture, and thickness of the roast duck were all perfect. It was far superior to the Peking roast duck that he had eaten in Quanjude when he was a child. The roasting technique used on the charcoal allowed the aroma of the fruit to seep into the duck meat perfectly. There wasn't a need for too many condiments, and the meat of the roast duck was far superior to that of the Peking roast duck that had been reared in captivity. Meg swallowed the piece of duck meat, and sighed with emotion. Ducks are fat in autumn, the ancients really didn't lie to me. Ducks that had just finished growing fat in autumn were at their most plump. Phyllis was a little perplexed as she ate the roast duck. Why does this duck taste so familiar? Have I eaten it before? There were 6 of them, 1 roast duck, and 2 plates of lotus leaf pancakes. It was obviously not enough. Hence, halfway through the meal, Mag went into the kitchen to make some food that could fill their stomachs, and that was the end of the lunch. After lunch, Yabamiya had already left with a plate of Yangzhou fried rice, and so had Barbara. Phyllis was still roasting beef kebabs in the kitchen. Meg looked at Sally, who was using water magic to clean the restaurant, and hesitantly said, "Aisha, there's something I want to ask of you." What is it? Sally turned to Meg. This request might be a little too much, and it's also a little unreasonable. You can refuse, there's no need to force yourself. A slightly awkward expression appeared on Meg's face. Boss, just say it. If it's within my ability, I'll try my best. Sally looked at Meg in confusion. This was the first time she had seen Meg so shy. Amy needs to attend a parent-teacher conference at school, and the school wants both parents of the child to be present. I want to ask you, to be Amy's mother. Meg wanted to find a hole in the ground to crawl into. Although he had practiced this conversation many times in his mind, he still felt very awkward when he actually said it to a girl. Sally faltered upon hearing this, and a faint blush appeared on her face as if she had suddenly realized something. Even her normally calm gaze was now tinged with a hint of panic. It's not what you think. I just want you to pretend to be Amy's mother and attend the parent-teacher conference with me. Of course, if you don't think it's suitable, then forget it. This request is a little too much. Meg shrugged and tried to speak in a relaxed tone. Sally looked into Meg's eyes and thought of how much he doted on Amy. Her heart suddenly softened. She hesitated for a moment, then clenched her fist and said, "If you think I'm suitable, I can do it. But what do you need me to do? Really?" Meg's eyes immediately lit up upon hearing that. The most suitable person for him right now was none other than Sally. If she didn't agree, then he would have to make a trip to the job market to rent a wife. Sally nodded again. Meg thought for a moment and frowned. It's my first time attending a parent-teacher conference, so I don't have much experience. But I should just go through the motions. After all, we're all children, so it shouldn't be too complicated. I'll ask them about the details later. Okay. Sally nodded slightly and moved her gaze away from Meg. Her fingertips moved gently, and a thin stream of water slid through the leaves of the green plants, cleaning all the dust on their surface. However, her gaze was a little unfocused. In the evening, there was a long line outside the restaurant. Did you hear? Mr. Mac is going to release a new dish tonight, Peking duck. Chapter 9:21. Little boss, is that duck head delicious? Harrison, who was at the front of the line, swallowed his saliva as he looked expectantly at Amy, who was sitting on a stool at the entrance of the restaurant. She was munching on a big duck head with relish in her hands. The customers in the line also swallowed their saliva uncontrollably. That duck head was golden and crispy, glistening with oil. Amy could barely hold it in her hands. She held it in her hands and munched on it. It was as if the whole world was not as important as that duck head in her hands. A blissful expression appeared on her dimpled face. This method was too much. I really want to beat someone up. Amy only reacted after a while. She looked up at Harrison and nodded with a smile. It's delicious. Uncle Gray Fatty, do you want to try it? Yes. Harrison nodded honestly. He looked at the roast duck head in Amy's hands with anticipation. Although this duck head had already been eaten by Amy, he did not mind. Then continued to think. Amy lowered her head and continued to eat the duck head in her hands. Harrison, the customers, although I'm so angry, but why am I still smiling? Does she think she can do whatever she wants just because she's cute? This. How can she be so cute just by eating a duck head? Harrison sighed silently in his heart. As expected, he could not get angry at all when he looked at that adorable little fellow. It's just a roast duck head, and little boss can make it taste so delicious. I feel like Mr. Mac is getting more and more out of line. Yeah, what's so great about letting little boss eat it for us to see? Do you think I'll want to eat it just by seeing it? Big brother, aren't you going to eat it later? Who said so? I'm going to eat the whole thing. No one can stop me. The customers were discussing softly, and the atmosphere was very lively. Miss Chris, you said you were going to bring me to try a delicious restaurant. Is it Dukas Restaurant? I've lived in Chaos City for over 30 years, and I've been back here every year. I'm more familiar with the restaurants in Aiden Square than you are. In a luxurious carriage, an old man wearing a gray silk robe asked Chris with a smile. I'm sure you're more familiar with Chaos City and the Aiden Square than I am. However, I'm not taking you to Dukas Restaurant this time. This restaurant wasn't open the last time you came back to Chaos City, Christy said with a smile. She looked at Cyril with respect in her eyes. Cheryl James was a renowned leather merchant on the Norland continent, and he was also one of the legends of the business world who originated from Chaos City. He was from the same generation as Old Buffett and President Jeffrey, but his business empire wasn't established in Chaos City. Instead, it was established in the Orc race and the Roth Empire. The Orcs who were good at hunting contributed about 60% of the leather to the Norland continent every year, and 90% of that was shipped to various parts of the continent through the James family. Cheryl was the soul of the family and the leader of the James family's business expansion. After a few decades of wandering, Cheryl decided to give up his power and return to Chaos City to retire. The James family didn't have a close relationship with Buffett banks. Even when it came to large amounts of leather, the James family chose to self-transport rather than go through Buffett banks. There was a rumor that old Buffett had something to do with Cheryl leaving Chaos City for the orcs. Therefore, the rumor that the two men didn't get along was a hot topic in the business circle of Chaos City. However, the two old men didn't agree with this rumor, and neither of them came forward to clarify it, so it attracted even more curiosity. To the staff of Buffett banks, the leather empire controlled by the James family was undoubtedly a huge piece of fat meat. If they could eat it, not to mention the huge bonus, it would be possible for them to directly enter the top management of Buffett banks. Christie had the honor of receiving Cheryl a few years ago. Although she was only dealing with a small matter at the time, when she heard that Cheryl had returned to Chaos City, Christie went to see him with the intention of giving it a try. She didn't expect that the kind old man would really meet her. Christie was very encouraged, and the two of them chatted happily. Before coming, Christie had done her homework. Old Mr. Cheryl had been very strict with himself all his life. He didn't like women and he didn't drink, but he had a special fondness for food. Although he lived in the orcs' territory, he would make time to go to Rodu every month just to taste the food there. Therefore, Christie wasn't in a hurry to talk about the cooperation. Instead, she took the initiative to take Cheryl to a restaurant. Cyril gladly accepted the invitation without putting on any airs. "Oh. A restaurant that just opened. I haven't been back for more than half a year. Is there a better restaurant than Dukas restaurant?" Cheryl was a little surprised. "You'll know when we get there." Christie smiled mischievously, keeping him in suspense. "Now that you mention it, I'm looking forward to it," Cheryl said slowly. He wasn't in a hurry. Dukas restaurant had always been the #1 restaurant in Chaos City, but in the eyes of a glutton like him, it was only a so-so. If it were in Rodu, it wouldn't even be ranked. However, the new restaurant that Chris had mentioned had piqued his curiosity. He wanted to see if the restaurant that Chris had praised to the heavens was worthy of its reputation. The horse-drawn carriage stopped, and Christie lifted the curtain to take a look. She turned to Cheryl with a resigned expression and said, "Master Cheryl, we're here, but we might have to wait in line for a while." "Wait in line?" Cheryl was a little surprised. He lifted the curtain and looked out. 2 long lines stretched from the entrance of the restaurant named Mamie's all the way to the square. There were at least 100 people in each line. He couldn't help but be surprised. "I didn't think there would be so many customers waiting in line. I've never seen this in a restaurant in Chaos City before." Even the most popular restaurants in Rodu didn't have such a large group of customers, so he was rather surprised to see one in Chaos City. "Master, I'll go talk to the owner and let you go first," the middle-aged coachman said respectfully. He jumped down from the horse-drawn carriage and prepared to go to the restaurant. Chapter 9:22. A smile appeared on Christie's face, and she looked at Cheryl with even more respect. She had seen many successful people, and the higher they were, the more approachable they were. Of course, that wouldn't have been the case in other restaurants, but in Mamie's, there were 2 10th-tier magic casters at the front of the line. Duke Abraham was also in the line, so Christie was a little worried that if the coachman tried to cut the line, he would be rejected by Mr. Mac. What if he got into a conflict with those powerful magic casters? The horse-drawn carriage stopped, and Cheryl followed Christie out of the carriage before walking straight to the back of the line. As he listened to the heated debates going on in the line, an expectant look appeared on Cheryl's face. In particular, the tofu pudding that he had heard the most arguments made him even more curious about what kind of food it was. Just what kind of food could make the customers so agitated just because of its taste? It was as if they were facing their mortal enemy. "Miss Christie, what is this tofu pudding? Why are these customers arguing over this?" Cyril couldn't help but ask curiously when he reached the end of the line. Tofu pudding is a delicacy from Immerse. It has two flavors, sweet and savory. The line on the left is for the savory one, while the line on the right is for the sweet one. I think the sweet tofu pudding is very delicious, and I suggest that you give it a try, Mr. Cyril, Christy explained with a smile. I see. This owner is really interesting. It's just a dish, but the customers are so protective of it. But I don't like sweet things, so I'll go with the savory tofu pudding, Cyril said with a smile. He then walked to the back of the line on the left with a smile. Christy opened her mouth to say something, but she resisted the urge to persuade him. She only liked sweet tofu pudding, and she didn't dare to imagine how it would taste if such a delicious dessert was made into a savory tofu pudding. Of course, aside from bringing Cyril to Mamie restaurant for a meal, her main objective for coming here today was to eat another bowl of tofu pudding. This tofu pudding was really amazing. Due to her anxiety, a few red pimples had grown on her nose and face, and she couldn't get rid of them no matter how hard she tried. However, after eating a bowl of tofu pudding that day, the pimples on her face were all gone when she woke up the next morning. Furthermore, her skin was noticeably better. Even the best hydration potion on the market couldn't achieve such an effect, so Chris was naturally pleasantly surprised. The pimples were gone, but as a woman, how could she be satisfied? Whether it was to make her skin fairer and fairer, or to get rid of those little pimples that were almost invisible, it was all worth it to make this trip and line up for this long. At 5:00, the door of the restaurant was opened. Meg welcomed the guests with a smile. Hello, Mr. Meg. Chris took the initiative to smile and nod at Meg. The last time she was able to get money from Duke Meg was all because of the stinky tofu, so she was very grateful to Meg. According to the news from Rodu, the branch of Buffett Banks had already moved into the Duke's mansion, and they were still counting the money that the Duke had promised. Although the exact amount hadn't been released yet, the boss had already told her that the bonus alone was equivalent to her entire salary from last year. Hello, Miss Chris. Meg also responded with a smile. He had some impression of this beautiful woman in a business suit, and her name was directly marked on the omniscient door. He had heard from Carla that this woman had exchanged half a helping of stinky tofu for a portion of Duke Abraham's money. Although it was a little tricky, it was enough to prove her business ability. Meg took a look at the old man who had followed Chris into the restaurant. He was wearing a loose black robe, and his hair and beard were all white. He looked quite benevolent and kind. A line of words floated across Meg's mind. Mr. Cyril, male, 65 years old, ordinary, suffers from coronary heart disease, often with symptoms of heart palpitations and chest pain. You can eat a roast duck wrapped in a lotus leaf cake to effectively relieve your symptoms. Ha! Meg raised an eyebrow. After making sure that he wasn't seeing things, a peculiar expression appeared on his face as he said internally, "System. Are you selling medicine now? You're writing prescriptions for people?" After the restaurant's upgrade, the omniscient door has also been upgraded accordingly. You can now recommend dishes according to the system's recommendations. The system's voice slowly sounded in Meg's mind. Dishes according to the symptoms. Why does it sound so weird? Meg curled his lips. But the system's ability did open up a shortcut for him to supplement his food. It completely saved him the trouble of ordering the wrong dish. Mr. Mac. A thin figure walked past Meg, greeted him, and quickly walked to the only seat left in the corner. Vicenio, male, 30 years old, ordinary, suffers from severe kidney deficiency, almost squeezed dry. Common symptoms are pain in the waist and knees, low spirits, impotence, premature ejaculation, and other symptoms. Can be prescribed 1 serving of black pepper steak and 2 Lagi Ruggiamos. If taken continuously for a week, his condition will be effectively improved. But in the meantime, he must abstain from sex. Otherwise, his condition will worsen. Meg looked at Vasenio's thin figure with pity. It seemed that this man was also under unimaginable pressure. But why did Meg feel like laughing when he saw this prescription that didn't contain sugar for kidney deficiency? Shouldn't he be handed a box of treasure of kidney at this time? Without thinking too much, Meg turned and walked to the kitchen. A new round of challenges was about to begin. Wow, this Peking duck costs 2,000 copper coins per serving. It's so expensive. It's almost the same price as grilled fish. Yeah. It seems that we won't be able to eat it today. But, isn't this picture too tempting? How can a roast duck be roasted to such a golden red color? It's even more tempting than Ducasa's roast pig. Although 2,000 copper coins is a little expensive, it says that it's suitable for 2 to 3 people. Are you guys interested in buying one? We'll split the cost. The customers opened the menu. After seeing the picture and the price of the roast duck, another round of whispers broke out. Shirel also opened the menu, and his eyes lit up when he saw the picture of the roast duck. He smiled and said, "If this picture isn't fake, then this duck looks even better than the roast geese from Rodu's Roast Goose restaurant. Would you like to order one, Miss Christie?" Chapter 9:23. I'd like a roast duck. I'd like one for my table too. I'd like a portion of stinky tofu. Although the price of 2,000 yuan deterred many of the customers, there were still many who chose to wait and see for the time being. There were also some customers who showed off an even more miraculous operation after joining the table, joining dishes. This was something that even Meg had never seen before. 4 people he didn't know at all, and they were a combination of an orc, a demon, a human, and a dwarf, actually hit it off and decided to go Dutch and join forces to share a portion of Peking duck. This kind of thing could probably only happen at Mamie's. What an interesting dining environment. Elves and demons are sharing a table, while humans and orcs are sharing a table and eating the same dish. What kind of magic does the food here have? Shirel looked at all of the customers in the restaurant with a hint of surprise on his face. He then turned to Mag, who was standing in the kitchen with a transparent window, and a smile appeared on his face. Just what kind of delicious food can such a young chef cook? I'm really looking forward to it. The roasting process that Mag was using had been optimized by the system. While maintaining the perfect flavor profile, the roasting process had been shortened from 40 minutes to 20 minutes. Furthermore, 10 roast ducks could be roasted in one go, which was undoubtedly a very fast roasting process. After the first roast duck was done, Meg slowly walked out of the kitchen with a cart. He stopped at Crass's table and placed the lotus leaf cake, sweet sauce, onion, and cucumber strips in front of him. Why is Mr. Mac serving the food himself? Yeah, this is the first time I've seen Mr. Mac serve the food himself. Could it be that the way to eat this roast duck isn't simple? The customers all looked curiously at Meg and the big metal-covered plate on the cart. There was also a knife and a chopping board on the small cart. Sir Crassus, your Peking duck. Meg lifted the metal cover, and a plump, jujube red roast duck appeared in front of everyone's eyes. The surface of the duck glowed faintly under the light, and it emitted an alluring glow. Gulp. The sound of people swallowing their saliva could be heard. Compared to the picture, the perfect roast duck presented in front of everyone was obviously more impactful. Since the stinky tofu hadn't been served yet, Meg didn't turn on the molecular isolation system. The aroma of the roast duck wafted through the air, and everyone's eyes lit up. This aroma is more than twice as strong as the roast goose in the roast goose house. It's just a duck. How can it be roasted with such a tempting aroma? Sire, who was sitting not far away, stared at the red roast duck with incredulity in his eyes. The Roast Goose restaurant in Rodu was one of the restaurants that he frequented. Their roast goose was one of the best in Rodu, but it was easy to get sick of eating too much of it, so he would make a special trip there every 2 months or so. He didn't think that he would be able to find a roast duck that was even more enticing than the roast goose in Chaos City. Crassus's eyes also lit up, but when he saw the roast duck that was bigger than an ordinary duck, he smiled and said, "It's so big, are we going to eat it directly?" "No, we need to slice it." Meg shook his head with a smile. He put on a pair of disposable gloves before picking up his cleaver and the roast duck. Meg's heavy cleaver danced through the air, and one slice of roast duck after another fell onto the plate like snowflakes. They were arranged in a perfect line, creating a beautiful sight to behold. Even the skin and the meat were almost identical in thickness. The entire roast duck was arranged in different positions on different plates, and in the blink of an eye, there was only a duck rack left. This operation made the guests exclaim in admiration. The exquisite knife skills could only be described as superb. After the processing of the duck meat, the roast duck, which was already very tempting, was suddenly filled with a sense of ceremony, which made the guests look forward to it even more. Meg sliced off the duck's head and neck before placing them on a plate in front of Crassus with a smile, and said, "Duck meat will taste even better when dipped in sweet sauce." Dip duck meat in sweet sauce and put it in a lotus leaf cake, then add onions and cucumbers on top. Enjoy your meal. Full marks. Crassus gave Meg a thumbs up, and couldn't wait to pick up a piece of duck meat with his chopsticks. He dipped it in the sweet sauce in front of him, then picked up a thin piece of lotus leaf cake, and put it in the middle awkwardly. He then put a slice of onions and cucumbers into his mouth, wrapped them up casually, and stuffed them directly into his mouth. The wonderful taste blossomed in his mouth, and Crassus's face lit up. The wonderful taste was indescribable. The lotus leaf cake was soft yet flexible, and it was sweet and delicious. The tender duck meat and crispy duck skin complemented each other. It was fat but not greasy. The onions and cucumbers sandwiched in between were even more refreshing and greasy. He enjoyed the delicious taste in his mouth. Crassus swallowed the roast duck and praised, "It's so delicious." Gulp, everyone in the restaurant swallowed their saliva at the same time. Chris looked at Cheryl, who swallowed her saliva, and a smile appeared on her face. It seemed like she was in luck this time. "I suddenly feel that the 2,000 copper coins are so worth it. Not only is it a delicious experience, but it's also a feast for the eyes. I want an extra serving of Peking duck. Miss Mia, I want an extra serving of Peking duck too." The customers who were still watching raised their hands to place their orders, afraid that the 100 roast ducks would be sold out if they were late. Mr. Meg is really amazing. Whether it's his superb cooking skills or his amazing knife skills, and so many people like him. Phyllis looked at Meg and secretly clenched her fists. I must become a chef like him. It only took Meg 2 minutes to slice a roast duck, but every time he served a pot of roast duck, Meg had to spend more than 20 minutes to slice the duck. This made him even more determined to let Phyllis master the technique of slicing duck as soon as possible, so that she could do it for him. Here's your roast duck, please enjoy. Meg placed the slices of duck meat in front of Christy and Sherry with a smile on his face. I think it's going to be a delicious feast. Cheryl looked up at Meg with a sincere expression. He had eaten in all the restaurants in Rodu, but he had never seen a chef slice a duck in front of him. This made him feel very curious, and at the same time, he was also looking forward to it. Thank you. Meg nodded slightly, and pushed the cart toward the kitchen. Chapter 9:24. There was no dipping sauce, no scallion or cucumber strips, and no thin lotus leaf pancake. It was just a thin slice of duck meat. As soon as it entered his mouth, the taste buds on the tip of his tongue were completely activated. He gently bit down, and the soft duck meat and crispy duck skin melted in his mouth at the same time. A rich and mellow fragrance instantly melted in his mouth. Amidst the rich aroma, the fruity aroma seemed so fresh and leisurely. This taste is simply too delicious. I've traveled all over the Orc territory, and tasted countless delicacies roasted over fires. I've also tasted all of the top-tier restaurants in Rodu, but I've never tasted duck meat as delicious as this. Shirel's eyes had completely lit up, and he couldn't help but praise. Roast Goose Restaurant's roast goose was one of the best in Rodu. It was a favorite of many nobles, and sold for 500 copper coins each. It wasn't something that ordinary people could afford. However, the roast goose from Roast Goose Restaurant, which claimed to be the best roast goose in the world, was nothing compared to this roast duck. It wasn't even worthy of being compared. I didn't think that I'd be able to eat such delicious roast duck in Chaos City. Let me try this dipping sauce again. Shirel picked up a piece of duck meat with his chopsticks, dipped it in the thick sweet sauce, and put it into his mouth. After dipping it in the thick sauce, the sweetness didn't appear to be too strong, but it contained a unique sauce aroma. The roast duck was already very delicious, but its flavor was enhanced to a whole new level by the perfect amount of sweetness and the unique sauce aroma. If he had to find a word to describe it, it would probably be perfect. The sweet sauce was slightly sweet and had a unique sauce aroma. It didn't steal the roast duck's place as the main dish. Instead, it served as the finishing touch, and enhanced the roast duck's deliciousness to a whole new level. Sweet sauces are very rare in the past, and they're not my style. However, this sauce gives me a very appropriate feeling. Without it, this roast duck would be a lot less delicious. Shirel was also looking at the sweet sauce with praise in his eyes. Try eating it according to Mr. Meg's classic recipe. At some point, Chris had wrapped a piece of duck meat, onion, and cucumber in mint ice and placed them in the middle of a small plate in front of Shirel. Miss Chris is very considerate. His eldest granddaughter was about the same age as this Miss Chris. However, his eldest granddaughter was always fooling around outside. He only saw her a few times a year, let alone making roast duck for him. How could she be as considerate as Miss Chris? He picked up the small square wrapped in a lotus leaf cake that was as thin as paper. Under the light, he could almost see through it. 2 shredded scallions and 2 even thinner cucumbers were placed on top of the duck meat, looking very delicate. Syrer carefully examined it for a while before putting it into his mouth. The soft and chewy lotus leaf cake was still a little warm and had a faint fragrance. After biting into it, the roast duck dipped in sweet sauce began to blossom with a wonderful taste. The fresh cucumbers and scallions made crisp crunching sounds as he bit into them. The taste of freshness and fullness seemed to blossom on the tip of his tongue, instantly dispelling the trace of greasiness brought about by the sweet sauce and roast duck. What a wonderful combination. What an interesting way to eat it, but it's combined into a subduing delicacy. It's simply too amazing. Syrer almost slammed the table and stood up. He had eaten all over Rodu, but he had never tasted anything as delicious as this. 1 roast duck, 3 different ways of eating it, and 3 different culinary experiences. Syrer felt that his perception of Chaos City's food had been completely shattered by this roast duck. This city finally had a dish that could amaze him. It's so delicious that I don't want to stop eating. Shirel picked up a piece of lotus leaf cake and began to wrap it with duck meat, onion, and cucumber strips. He then put the cake into his mouth, and a blissful smile appeared on his face as he savored the amazing taste of the cake. Is it really that delicious? Chris also had an expectant look on her face. She picked up a piece of lotus leaf cake and wrapped it up for herself. She put it in front of her mouth and took a graceful bite. Oh! This is so delicious. Chris's eyes almost immediately narrowed into slits, and she couldn't hide the elated smile on her face. Even though she was full of anticipation, she was still stunned by the delicious taste of the lotus leaf cake. Mr. Mac really is invincible when it comes to making ducks. Mr. Mac really is a genius when it comes to making ducks. Mr. Mac's duck is so delicious. All of the customers were also full of praise for this Peking duck. They were completely immersed in Meg's fancy knife skills and the delicious taste of the roast duck. I didn't want to be a duck, so please be kind, everyone. Meg rolled his eyes in his heart, but he was still very happy to be praised by everyone. Aside from those freaks, there were very few people in this world who didn't feel anything when others praised them. I want a roast duck. I'm sorry, sir, but today's 100 Peking ducks are all sold out. If you want to try roast duck, please come back early tomorrow night. Yabamiya smiled and refused one request after another. He didn't seem to have any intention of negotiating. That customer still didn't give up. He poked his head into the kitchen and said to Meg, "Mr. Mac, it's still early. Why don't you make another pot of roast duck for us? With all of us working together, I'm sure it won't be a problem. What do you think?" All of the other customers who wanted to order roast ducks also looked in the direction of the restaurant, wondering if Meg would agree. "I'm sorry, sir, but to ensure the quality, we only prepare so many roast ducks every day. Today's duck is all sold out, so there's no more left. If you become more familiar with roast duck in the future, you might be able to roast more," Meg said with a smile. He also didn't seem to have any intention of negotiating. This owner is really interesting. Can I have another helping of this tofu pudding? Cheryl put down the spoon in her hand and looked at the empty bowl in front of her. She still wanted more. Then Mr. Meg will probably say something similar to what you just said, Christy said helplessly. If possible, she also wanted another helping of tofu pudding. Cheryl was stunned for a moment, then smiled awkwardly. She looked at Meg's back in the kitchen, and couldn't help but sigh with emotion. There aren't many chefs in this world who take their food as seriously as he does. Yes, Mr. Meg is a special chef. Christy nodded in agreement. She looked at Meg's back, and her eyes flashed slightly. That was a special kind of attraction. Since we don't have the right to continue enjoying the food, let's go. Cheryl paid the bill and walked out of Mamie's with Christy. She looked at Christy with a smile, and said, "Today was the happiest meal I've had since I came back to Chaos City. I really have to thank you, Miss Christy. You're too kind. I should be the one thanking you for treating me to such a delicious roast duck." Christy shook her head with a smile. You're so much more interesting than my disappointing grandchildren. If you're not in a hurry to go back, you can take a walk in the Aiden Square with me and chat. The night was getting darker, and the long line outside Mamie's had disappeared. It was undoubtedly true love that could endure hunger until now. However, the expansion of the restaurant and the improvement of Meg's cooking efficiency was also an important reason why most of the customers were satisfied before the restaurant closed. Ding! The restaurant door was pushed open with a soft sound. Chapter 9:25. Elliot stood at the entrance of the restaurant, and a hint of surprise flashed through his eyes as he looked at Sally, who was wearing a cheongsam and carrying a tray filled with bowls and plates. However, he didn't express it too much. After a brief silence, he smiled and said, "I'm here to eat. Can I still eat now? Welcome. Opening hours are not over yet. If you'd like to place your order, please find a seat." Yabamiya stepped forward with a smile, and guided Elliot to his seat. "What's wrong, Aisha?" Mia asked softly as she nudged Sally with her elbow while Elliot was looking at the menu. This was the first time that she had seen such an expression on Sally's face. Shouldn't elves be happy to see other elves? I'm fine. Sally shook her head as she put away all of the dishes on the table before quickly making her way toward the kitchen. However, her hands suddenly trembled, and the messy stacks of plates fell to the ground, looking as if they were about to crash to the ground. Sally's expression changed slightly. She hadn't made such a low-level mistake in a long time. Stop. Barbara, who was serving the dishes on the tray, pointed a finger, and the plates that were about to fall to the ground stopped in midair. She then waved her finger, and the plates stacked together before flying back to Sally's tray. Be careful. Barbara walked past Sally, and winked at her. Sally nodded slightly, and walked toward the kitchen with the tray in her hands. A 7th-tier spatial magic caster. And a half-dragon and Sally. Who is the owner of such a small restaurant that has 2 7th-tier magic casters as waitresses? Elliot was looking at the menu, and he looked up at Babla with a hint of surprise in his eyes. He then looked at Yabamiya with a curious expression as he turned toward the kitchen. Sally entered the kitchen, and closed the door behind her. She put down the plates in her hands, and walked over to Phyllis, who was watching Meg cook. Saw. Sister Aisha, you. Phyllis looked at Sally, and couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Sally whispered into Phyllis's ear, "Shh, Phyllis, don't say anything. The leader of the Brewster family is right outside. He might be coming for me, but if he finds out that you're here, he might take you away as well." Meg's hands faltered as he looked up at Sally and Phyrus, and a hint of resignation and disappointment appeared in his eyes. Even though this was within his expectations, he didn't think that it would come so quickly. Sally was going to leave in the end. After the queen went into seclusion and Irina was deposed, the conflict between the factions in the elven race became even more intense. It was no longer a secret that Borg was trying to become the first male ruler in the history of the elven race, but Helena still insisted on promoting a new elven princess and grooming her to become the new elven queen. Sally was at the top of Helena's list. What few people knew was that this young mistress of the Brunst family, who had been internally designated as the elven princess and even the future elven queen, was now working as a waitress in a restaurant in Chaos City. Meg had expected that the leader of the Brewster family would come to him in person, but when it really happened, he still felt a little sad. It would be very difficult to find such a well-rounded and outstanding employee again. However, if word got out that he had found an elven princess to be the mother of his child, and had let another elven princess work as a waitress in a restaurant for a few months, the enmity between him and the elves would most likely be irreconcilable. As for Phyllis, Meg wasn't worried that Elliot would take her away by force. If the leader of the Brewster family hadn't lost his mind, he probably wouldn't do anything to someone who Alex had brought to Chaos City. Besides, he probably didn't want too many people to know that he had come to Chaos City. A hint of panic flashed across Phyllis's eyes when she heard Sally's words. She looked out of the restaurant, and then back at Sally. She nervously and worriedly asked, "Big Sister Aisha, what about you?" Although she hadn't had much contact with Sally in the past 2 days, the fact that Sally, who was rumored to be in seclusion, had appeared in Chaos City and was working as a waitress in a restaurant meant one thing: Miss Sally had run away from home. The worst thing that could happen to someone who ran away from home was to be found. Now that Elliot had appeared in Amy's in person, could it be that he was here to bring Miss Sally back? "I'm fine. He's already seen me." A resigned smile appeared on Sally's face. She shook her head, and quickly regained her composure. She put the dishes she had just cleaned into the dishwasher, picked up the tray, and walked out of the door. Elliot looked away from Meg when he saw Sally coming out of the door. He looked at Sally, who was cleaning the tables and chairs skillfully with a little water magic, and the surprise in his eyes gradually turned into relief. When she was in the family, he had never seen Sally do such things. Although she wasn't lazy, she was too sharp, and couldn't calm down to do what he told her to do. She even imitated Irina and ran away from home. But now, her sharpness and pride seemed to have been restrained. She was still Sally, but she was no longer the Miss Sally. He thought he would be furious when he saw her again, but he was surprisingly calm, and even a little relieved. She's been walking for so long, but she stopped at Chaos City. What's attracting her here? Elliot thought to himself. This wasn't like his daughter who wanted to be like Irina. Sally had already calmed down. She didn't try to avoid Elliot's gaze, and did her work seriously and meticulously as usual. Elliot looked at Sally, who walked past him, and asked with a smile, "It's my first time here. Do you have any recommendations?" Sally stopped in her tracks, and was silent for a while. She turned around and looked into Elliot's eyes. She was silent for a while again, and was surprised by his calmness. Then, she flipped open the menu, and said, "You can try the black pepper steak. If you want a drink, you can order a glass of beer." "All right, I'll take those too," Elliot said as he closed the menu. "Give me a moment." Sally nodded slightly, and turned to walk into the kitchen. Not long after, the steaming steak and bubbling beer were served on the dining table and placed in front of Elliot. Chapter 9:26. The steak knife wasn't very sharp, but it was still able to slice open the tender steak with ease. Red wine and meat juices flowed out, and the aroma of the steak became even more pronounced, making Elliot's throat twitch involuntarily. He picked up a small piece of steak with his fork and placed it into his mouth. He took a gentle bite, and delicious meat juices flowed out from the tender beef. The aroma of black pepper was just right, and the delicious flavor danced on the tip of his tongue, making a blissful smile appear on Elliot's face. This wonderful feeling was simply too inconceivable. Compared to this, the so-called delicacies he had tasted in the Wind Forest were like heaven and earth. Tang Wulin felt as if he could sense the vitality of the beef, and he could tell that this was definitely a perfectly healthy ironhide bowl. What was even more incredible was that the red wine that had been added to the steak was like a treasure hidden in the depths of the forest. It was irresistibly intoxicating. This was a delicious feast, and he was completely intoxicated by it. After swallowing a mouthful of beef, he felt as if a ball of warmth had flowed down his throat, providing the most gentle comfort to his famished stomach. One mouthful after another, Elliot's knife and fork didn't stop for a single moment. This type of delicacy was simply irresistible, and he simply couldn't stop himself. Ding! The knife and fork clanged against the empty plate. Elliot looked at the empty plate in front of him, and was a little surprised that he had already finished a portion of steak, but he still hadn't had his fill. Who would have thought that there would be such delicious food in this world? No wonder Sally didn't want to leave after coming here. There's probably no other place in this world that's more enticing than this, Elliot lamented to himself. All of his previous suspicions about whether Sally had been forced into this place had been completely erased. Elliot put down his knife and fork and picked up the beer that had been sitting beside him for a while. Within the large crystal glass was a clear golden beer. 2/3 of the beer was alcohol, while the other third was white foam. Could it be barley wine? Elliot was a little perplexed as he brought the glass closer to him. As soon as the glass came into contact with him, a faint aroma wafted toward him. It was elegant yet not pungent. "It smells so good. It smells like barley wine, but the aroma is softer. Perhaps it's an improved version. Why don't you try it?" Elliot raised his glass and took a sip. The wine in the early winter was slightly cold, but the taste was very refreshing and mellow without losing its mellowness. Unlike barley wine, which was hard to conceal its bitterness, the wine was harmonious and soft, and had a strong killing power. Although there was a trace of bitterness, it was exceptionally delicate, weak, and slightly pleasant. There was no aftertaste, nor was there a lingering aftertaste. After swallowing it, one could not help but want to take another sip. Gulp, gulp. Elliot tilted his head back and quickly downed the large glass of beer. Elliot put down the glass. There was still some white foam on the glass. He burped and looked at Sally. "Give me another steak and a glass of beer." Sally looked at the time and shook her head. "The restaurant's business hours are about to end. We won't be serving any more food." "Is that so? Looks like I'll have to come over earlier tomorrow." Elliot was a little disappointed, but he didn't say much. He took out a purse from his waist and smiled at Sally. "Shall we settle the bill?" After business hours were over, all the customers had left. Sally looked at Yabamiya and the others. "You guys can go back first. I have to go somewhere after the restaurant is cleaned, so I'll be back later." "Okay, then you should go back earlier too." Mia nodded. She left with Barbara and Phyllis, who had a scarf wrapped around her face and ears. The gentle water cleansed every nook and cranny of the restaurant, and they surrounded Sally as if they were little elves that were obedient to her commands. Meg stood off to the side and looked at this scene in silence. Amy had already gone upstairs to play in her playground. The flowing water disappeared, and the restaurant looked brand new. The green leaves in the glass vases exuded vitality, and no ashes could be seen in the corners. Sally turned to Meg and said calmly, "Boss, I may have to go." "Are you going back?" Meg also asked calmly. "Yes." Sally nodded as she looked at Meg. She then turned her gaze to the restaurant, and a smile appeared on her face as she said, "I wanted to travel the entire Norland continent, but I didn't think that I'd stop at Chaos City. It's a little different from what I had envisioned, but I feel like I've had a lot of fun during this time. I've made new friends, so there's nothing to regret." Meg looked at Sally. Although this girl didn't smile often, she looked even prettier when she smiled. Meg was Mamie Restaurant's second customer and second waiter. He was a capable employee who was responsible for all the work, such as the finances, cleaning, and clearing the tables. He was also a very pleasant friend whom Meg got along very well with in both work and life. He was about to leave, so Meg couldn't help but feel a little reluctant. If he could, of course, he would want her to stay. However, he obviously couldn't. Besides, it had to be Sally's choice to leave or stay. She could return to the Wind Forest and become the new elven princess, continue to work at Amy's as a waitress, or go on the road of escape again. The latter two options were no longer an option after the head of the Brewster family came to her in person. Sally looked at Meg for a long time, and finally said, "Thank you." Meg smiled, and said, "Are you leaving tonight, or can you wait until tomorrow?" "If it's possible, I want to have dinner with all of us again to see you off. I don't like parting. If it's possible, I hope you can tell them after I leave. I'll go to Amy's parent-teacher conference with you tomorrow." Sally shook her head. She blushed at the mention of the parent-teacher conference, and looked away from Meg to a green leaf. "Okay." Meg nodded. "I'm leaving now." Sally took her coat and walked out of the door. "Life is really..." Meg raised his eyebrows. He walked slowly to the door, locked it, turned off the light, and walked to the stairs. He couldn't help but smile when he saw Amy sitting on the stairs with Ugly Duckling in her arms. "Come back with me, Sally," Elliot said with a smile when he saw Sally coming out of the restaurant. Chapter 9:27. "All right, we'll go back to the forest at this time tomorrow night." Elliot nodded. "All right." Sally nodded. This conversation between father and daughter ended far sooner than Sally had anticipated. She was still in a bit of a daze as she watched Elliot disappear from the square. Has he changed? Sally was a little perplexed as she stood on the spot for a while before quickly departing as well. Not long after that, someone arrived at a small courtyard in the Elven embassy in Chaos City. Following that, a conversation between two young people ensued. At some point, magic waves erupted, but they quickly disappeared. After the person left, Blower stood in the courtyard with a disconsolate expression. Why is he so mean to me? My apologies, young Mistress Elizabeth. It took me so long to bring you food, you must be starving. Yabamiya looked at Elizabeth with an apologetic expression as he put down the box of Yangzhou fried rice in his hand. It's all right, I'm not hungry. Elizabeth looked up at Yabamiya, and hesitated momentarily before turning away. I want to drink some water. Water. Then the water dispenser. Yabamiya faltered momentarily before coming to his senses. He then apologized, I'm sorry, I forgot to tell you how to use the water dispenser. I'll go get you some water first. Elizabeth looked at Yabamiya's back resentfully. Why did she have to say something so embarrassing? And, why is the water coming out of that small pipe? Is there a fountain under the house? She wondered. She was not sure if there was a fountain under the house. Yabamiya soon returned with a large glass of water. Elizabeth accepted the glass gracefully before downing the entire glass in one gulp. I'll go get you another glass. Yabamiya accepted the glass in a natural manner before turning around to pour another glass of water. Elizabeth was much more elegant this time. After drinking more than half of the water in one gulp, she opened the box of Yangzhou fried rice and began to eat with a spoon. Yabamiya gently closed the door and looked at Elizabeth, who was eating quietly by the bed. Her complexion was much better than yesterday, but she still looked weak and pale, perhaps because she had lost too much blood. After a moment of hesitation, she carefully sat at the end of the bed. Thank you, Elizabeth said to Yabamiya. She paused in the middle of her meal and turned to look at her. You're welcome. Yabamiya stood up and waved his hand nervously. Elizabeth finished her dinner quickly. There was not a single grain of rice left in the box. Yabamiya tidied up the lunchboxes and poured Elizabeth a glass of water. She took the quilt out of the wardrobe and prepared to make the bed on the floor. Are you going to sleep on the floor tonight? Elizabeth asked Yabamiya, who was hugging the quilt. Yes, I am. Yabamiya nodded. When he saw Elizabeth's unhappy expression, he hurriedly said, Did I disturb you when you were sleeping last night? If that's the case, I can sleep on the sofa in the living room. This bed is quite big. I can't sleep on it alone. I'll sleep on the inside. You can sleep on the other side. Elizabeth retracted her gaze and said calmly. However, she could not help but tighten her grip on the cup. Ah! Yabamiya was stunned. He thought he had misheard. He looked at Elizabeth in disbelief and asked uncertainly, Can I sleep on the bed too? If you don't like it, you can sleep on the floor. Elizabeth finished the water in the glass and lay down on the bed. She pulled the glass over her body and turned her back to Yabamiya. Yabamiya hugged the quilt and hesitated for a while. In the end, he stuffed the quilt back into the wardrobe. He carefully laid down on the other side of the bed. Then, inch by inch, he inched inwards until his body touched the edge of the bed and the quilt covered his body. He immediately stopped and lay straight like a log. He whispered, Miss Elizabeth, can you turn off the light now? Yes. Elizabeth gave a lukewarm response, but a faint smile appeared on her face. For some reason, she found Yabamiya's cautious and clumsy demeanor to be rather adorable. Yabamiya reached out to turn off the bedside lamp. The room fell into darkness and silence. She tried hard to control her breathing. She did not even dare to breathe too loudly. She could hear her heart thumping loudly. Apart from that day when she fell asleep on the bed, this was the first time she slept on the same bed as someone else after her mother passed away. It was a strange feeling. The other party was a noble giant dragon and a powerful one. Yet, he allowed her to sleep on the same bed as him. Miss Elizabeth is such a good person, Yabamiya thought to herself. She had probably forgotten that this bed belonged to her. Elizabeth was also in a strange mood. She had never slept on the same bed as anyone else, not even her mother. As far as she could remember, she had never slept on the same bed as her mother. Giant dragons were a symbol of strength. They had to learn to be independent from a young age. That was why she rarely felt intimate with her mother, even though she knew that her mother loved her deeply. But now, the one lying beside her was her younger sister. They shared the same father, but she rarely saw him. Mia had never even seen his face. It was such a similar experience that made her heart ache. The attraction that came from the depths of her heart made her heart throb. She even wanted to turn around and give her a hug. This was a thought that even she could not believe. Just like that, the two of them remained silent, and silent. Then, they both fell asleep. The next morning, Yabamiya woke up in a daze. She felt that the blanket was heavier and warmer than usual. Light shone into the room through the screen. When Yabamiya opened her eyes, she saw a face that was very close to her. Yabamiya woke up immediately. Her eyes widened as she stared at the face that was so close to her in disbelief. Her skin was as white as snow, smooth and flawless. Her nose was straight, and her eyelashes were long. But none of this was important. The most important thing was, how did she end up in the middle of the bed? And how did she end up in Miss Elizabeth's arms? Their bodies were almost completely pressed together. I'm dead. I'm dead. I'm dead for sure this time. Yabamiya's heart was pounding, and her mind was completely blank. But, it's so warm, so comfortable. Although her mind was blank, her body still gave Yabamiya honest feedback about her current condition. Chapter 9:28. She was most afraid of the sudden silence. Yabamiya's expression froze. Before she could retract the comfortable smile on her face, her eyes were gradually filled with fear. Elizabeth's expression was a little strange. She was also a little flustered. She didn't know when she had wrapped her arms around Yabamiya so naturally. No matter how she looked at it, it seemed like she was the one who had initiated it. This. Elizabeth felt her face begin to heat up. Although the bed wasn't small, the two of them were so close that they were practically stuck together. Moreover, the size of their breasts was indeed larger than a normal person's. Although it was a soft and warm feeling, she still felt a little embarrassed. She had never been so close to anyone before. Moreover, they had been in this state for an entire night. Elizabeth's fair face flushed red at the thought of this. However, when she looked at Yabamiya, who seemed to be in a daze, she couldn't bear to throw her out. For a moment, she didn't know what to do. Instead, they continued to be in a stalemate. After her mind went blank for a moment, Yabamiya gradually calmed down. She couldn't help but feel a little amused when she saw the blush on Elizabeth's fair face. She didn't expect Miss Elizabeth to blush too. Feeling her breathing gradually becoming heavier and her heartbeat so close to her, she was even more surprised. If that was the case, Miss Elizabeth would also be nervous. While Yabamiya was still curious, Elizabeth's embarrassed and angry voice sounded, "Are you going to keep lying down?" "Ah!" Yabamiya snapped out of her daze and jumped up from the bed. She took 2 steps back and said apologetically, "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Miss Elizabeth. I don't know how I ended up in the middle of the bed. I'm thirsty." Elizabeth sat up. She had regained her composure. She turned her face to look out the window and interrupted Yabamiya. "I'll get you some water." Yabamiya quickly stopped herself and put on her slippers. She opened the door and walked out. This girl. The corners of Elizabeth's mouth curled up into a smile. She raised her hand and stretched her waist, revealing her beautiful figure. She thought to herself, it seems that I haven't had such a good sleep for many years. So it's because I'm hugging her that I feel so safe and comfortable. Water. Yabamiya carefully handed the cup over. She secretly looked at Elizabeth and felt uneasy. Thank you. Elizabeth took the cup and took 2 sips. She raised her head and looked at Yabamiya and said, I have to go. Oh. So soon. Yabamiya was slightly taken aback, and she couldn't hide the longing on her face. There are some things that must be done. Elizabeth nodded. But your body. Yabamiya wanted to say something, but she stopped herself. It's almost healed. Don't underestimate a giant dragon's regenerative abilities. When you become a true giant dragon, you'll understand how powerful giant dragons are. Elizabeth put down the cup and smiled confidently. Yabamiya was still worried. I don't know what happened to Miss Elizabeth, but if you're still in danger, you can stay here. It's safe here. There's no need for that. Elizabeth stood up and pressed her hand on the table. A small and exquisite blue gemstone ring appeared on the table. Thank that elf for me. Keep this ring for me. I'll come and find you again. A snowflake appeared under Elizabeth's feet. The temperature in the room dropped by a few degrees. She disappeared in a flash of white light. If only I could come back. A murmur echoed in the air. Miss Elizabeth. Yabamiya looked at the empty room, and a sense of loss welled up in her heart. After a while, Yabamiya walked to the table and picked up the ring. Her eyes lit up and she couldn't help but praise, what a beautiful ring. The blue gemstone in the shape of a droplet was clear and transparent. There were no impurities. The silver ring was like a snowflake. There were intricate dragon patterns carved on it. Can I put it on? Yabamiya hesitated for a while. In the end, she shook her head. She took out a piece of cloth from the wardrobe and wrapped the ring carefully. She carefully placed it in the innermost corner of the wardrobe. I hope Miss Elizabeth can come back safely. Even if you become a true giant dragon, you'll still encounter danger. After all, there are humans in this world who can slay giant dragons. For example, Alex, who is famous for being a dragon slayer. Yabamiya thought to herself. She paused and said with fear, Alex must be very fierce. Even a giant dragon would be afraid of him. I hope I won't meet him in my life. Has she left already? Sally, who had just woken up and washed up, looked at Yabamiya's room. She couldn't help but sigh in relief. She wanted to talk to Miss Dragon before she left, but it seemed that there was no need for that now. Aisha. Yabamiya just opened the door. When she saw Sally, she quickly walked up to her with a smile, and said, Good morning. Miss Elizabeth just left. She asked me to thank you. Good morning, Mia. You're welcome. Sally nodded. Every time she saw Mia's energetic smile, she would be affected by her and become more cheerful. Mia held Sally's hand, and said seriously, But apart from that, I have something to ask of you. There's an orc who wants to celebrate his 5-year-old son's birthday at the ice cream shop tomorrow afternoon. His son is very sick, and the doctor said he won't live for long. However, he still wants to see snow, so if it's possible, I'm sorry, Mia. I won't be able to help you tomorrow because I have to go somewhere tomorrow. Sally looked at Mia, and shook her head apologetically. Is that so? Mia was slightly disappointed, but she quickly shook her head with a smile, and said, It's all right, I can think of another way. You can go do your own things, Aisha. Okay. Sally nodded slightly, and walked toward the bathroom. This girl always puts others first. My heart aches for her. After waking up early in the morning, Meg sat at his desk and began to draft a recruitment notice. However, after racking his brain for an hour and tossing a trash can full of drafts, he still couldn't come up with a satisfactory one. In this world, looks and abilities can never be equated with a low salary. Meg sighed. Chapter 929. Meg was the only one who knew that Sally was leaving, so the atmosphere in Amy's was still as harmonious as before. Meg didn't like separation, and he didn't like to be separated from others, so he followed Sally's instructions and didn't tell anyone else about it. However, when he saw the head of the Brewster family sitting leisurely in the restaurant and ordering food, he almost couldn't help but put some drugs in the food. But he held himself back in the end. After all, this was Sally's payment, and she was also a customer of the restaurant. Halfway through cooking, Meg saw George packing up a portion of braised chicken and rice and was about to leave. He hurriedly put down the spatula and chased after George, who was already out of the restaurant, and quickly walked up to him. "Mr. Mack, what's the matter?" George stood at the entrance of the restaurant and asked Meg with a smile as he pushed the door open. Meg walked up and said a little awkwardly, "Amy and the others are going to have a parent-teacher conference. I haven't attended one before, so I don't know what to prepare. George, you must be more experienced than me, so I wanted to ask for your advice. This afternoon, right? I almost forgot that Mr. Mack is also going to attend the parent-teacher conference." George looked at Meg with a smile and said, "Mr. Mack, you don't have to be too nervous about the parent-teacher conference. The children are so young. In fact, the school gives us a chance to interact with the children and give them a little more care. Generally, parents only need to go alone. There are also some parents who bring some snacks for their children or make their own desserts." "Oh, I see." Meg's eyes lit up, and he suddenly understood. As expected, he was too serious. He smiled and said, "Thank you. When you're free, bring sister-in-law and the children over for dinner." "Okay, Mr. Mack, go do your work," George replied with a smile. When Amy returned to the restaurant at noon, she ran to the kitchen door expectantly and asked Meg, "Father, are you really going to the parent-teacher conference this afternoon?" "Yes. It's Amy's first parent-teacher conference. Of course I'm going." Meg turned around and smiled. "That's great." Amy was so happy that she jumped on the spot, but soon calmed down and whispered to Meg, "Then, what about Mother? Did you settle it?" Phyllis, who was cutting vegetables, her ears twitched, and a look of concern appeared on her face. "Your big sister Sally agreed," Meg replied in the same whisper. "Dad's SSSSSSSS. It's not me Sammy, SSSSS, why is. But, during the recruitment, this should be considered one of my jobs, right? Or Phyllis explained to herself. "Phyllis, you don't have to practice roasting beef kebabs this afternoon. Come with me to the market after the restaurants. You need to learn how to slice duck this afternoon." Meg's words interrupted Phyllis's train of thought. "Huh? You want me to slice roast duck?" Phyllis was taken aback, and then a look of nervousness and uneasiness appeared on her face. It was different from slicing vegetables in the kitchen. She had to slice roast duck in front of the customers. With so many customers watching, she was a little scared. "Yes. You're the only one in the restaurant who can do that. I need your help." Meg looked at Phyllis with a sincere expression. "But..." Phyllis looked into Meg's eyes, which were filled with trust, and calmed down a lot. However, she was still a little worried. There are too many customers in the restaurant right now, and slicing roast duck is a very time-consuming task. I need to spend more time on cooking, so I can only leave this important task to you. I believe you can do it well, Meg said with a smile, and his eyes were filled with encouragement. Phyllis felt as if she would be committing a crime if she refused. After hesitating for a long time, she nodded and said, "Then I'll give it a try." "All right, let's eat." Meg nodded with a smile, and then walked out with the roast fish that had just been taken out of the pot. "We're eating 15 minutes early today, and it's so sumptuous. Could it be that today is a good day?" Yabamia looked at the table filled with delicacies, and there was even a glass of beer in front of everyone. He looked at Meg with curiosity. "Aside from the stinky tofu, all of the dishes on the menu have been served." Barbara also swallowed her saliva. This was the most sumptuous meal she had ever seen at Mamie's. "All of my favorite dishes have been served," Amy said with an elated expression as she held back Ugly Duckling, which was trying to poke its head out of the table. Everyone looked at Meg. He was indeed acting a little strange today. There was no guarantee that they would be able to finish all of the dishes. Sally's eyes flashed slightly. She knew why this was the case. "I feel that we haven't had a good gathering at Mamie Restaurant for quite some time. Since we're all fated to be together, I hope that even if we part ways one day, there will still be some beautiful memories in our hearts. Mamie Restaurant's doors will always be open for all of you." Meg raised his wine glass with a smile and said, "Cheers." "Cheers." Everyone raised their glasses and clinked them with smiles on their faces before taking a big gulp. Amy also raised her ice cream and took a big lick of it with elation. Lunch concluded on a happy note. Meg's smile widened at the sight of Sally's beaming face. She might not like the life she was going to live, but this was her choice, so he decided to respect it. If she were to take control of that forest, things would definitely be a lot better than it was now. In any case, Irina wasn't very interested in becoming the Elven Queen. After lunch, Mag and Phyrus made a trip to the market, where they bought 10 ducks that were similar in size to the 3 flower ducks. They entrusted the duck sellers with the task of processing the ducks before bringing them back to the restaurant and placing them into the oven in batches. For a roast duck of this size, it's best to slice it into 108 slices. This is a very strange number. Slicing more doesn't show your skill, but slicing less doesn't show your skill. It's best to slice it just right. Let's slice it from here first, then. After the first roast duck was cooked, Meg began to explain to Phyllis in detail how to slice the duck and analyze its skeleton. Chapter 9:30. Chaos School's parent-teacher conference could be considered as a grand event in Chaos City. There was only one school in Chaos City, and it was the city with the highest basic education rate on the Norland continent. Most of the young residents of Chaos City had studied in Chaos School, or their children had studied in Chaos City. Therefore, on this day, as long as someone applied for leave for the parent-teacher conference, no boss would make things difficult for them. There were all kinds of carriages and horses parked in front of Chaos School. Although there were many of them, they didn't look messy at all. They were parked in an orderly manner under the command of the students' parents. The students' parents weren't dressed too extravagantly like they would for a banquet. Instead, they were dressed appropriately. This was one of the traditions of Chaos School's parent-teacher conference. Although there were no restrictions, even the nobles and tycoons had to keep a low profile on this day. There was a principle in Chaos School: only the wise and the strong would be respected among their peers. Therefore, the way the parents dressed didn't actually have much of a positive impact on their children. This was determined by Chaos School's ethos. However, if they stood out too much in the crowd, their children would be looked at differently, which wasn't a good thing. As such, when Mag arrived at the entrance of Chaos School with Sally on his bicycle, wearing a casual suit and black leather shoes, and carrying a long box wrapped in black cloth on his back. He was quite surprised. He had thought that he would be able to enjoy a unique fashion show, but was instead surprised to find that he was very conspicuous on his bicycle. What's he riding? Why does it have 2 wheels? What's that on his back? A long black box. Wow, that elf is so beautiful. She's already a mother at such a young age. The parents who were entering the school were whispering to each other as they looked at Meg and Sally. Being stared at by so many people as Amy's mother, Sally was also a little nervous. She whispered, "Oh. Meg, what should we do now? Let's park the bicycle first, and then get ready to enter. The parent-teacher conference is about to begin." Meg, on the other hand, was very calm. He looked around and saw a familiar face. He pushed his bicycle to the side. "Mr. Mack, you're here." George was wearing a yellow singlet of unknown numbers, and he smiled at Meg and Sally. He immediately guessed why Sally had come here, but he didn't say anything. "Yeah, can I park my car here?" Meg nodded with a smile. "Of course. There's no better place to park than Mr. Mack's carriage here." George nodded, and stepped aside to make room for Meg. "What kind of treasure did Mr. Mack bring?" George asked curiously as he looked at the long black box slung over Meg's shoulder. "Secret." Meg smiled, picked up the insulated box in the basket, and waved at George. "See you later. Let's go in first." "Okay, see you later." George nodded with a smile. He looked at the box in Meg's hand, scratched his head, and murmured, "What kind of treasure did Mr. Mack bring? Why are you being so secretive?" Chaos School covered a large area. According to the age and stage of the students, it was divided into 2 sections, the kindergarten section and the how high section. The parent-teacher conference was only for the students in the kindergarten section. According to the principal, the students in the how high section were already at the stage of living and learning independently. When they officially needed to be independent from their parents, there was no need for parent-teacher conferences. However, there were close to 20,000 students in the kindergarten section. According to the school's request, both parents of the children were expected to be present at the same time. It was equivalent to 60,000 people entering the kindergarten section at the same time. Luckily, Chaos School is really big. Meg couldn't help but sigh as he walked in the school and looked at the dense crowd that was slowly moving forward. So being a parent is such a joyful thing. Sally walked beside Meg and looked at the smiles on the faces of the parents. She couldn't help but feel a little touched. Children seemed to be a very distant thing to her. After all, before she left the Wind Forest, she was just a child in everyone's eyes. Now, she was here as Amy's mother to attend her parent-teacher conference. Although it was a pretense, she still felt a little strange. Meg and Sally's team was quite eye-catching because of the long box wrapped in black cloth on Meg's back. If it weren't for the fact that they didn't look like bad guys, some parents would have already checked what Meg was carrying. There. Meg caught sight of Luna, who was standing at the door of the classroom with a smile on her face, and he walked over to her with Sally in tow. "Mr. Meg, you." Luna looked at Meg, and soon noticed Sally standing beside Meg. She hesitated for a moment, and then quickly recovered. A smile appeared on her face again, and she said, "You're here." "Yes, Teacher Luna," Meg replied with a smile. "Father." Amy, who was sitting beside Daphne, waved happily at Meg. Then, her gaze landed on Sally, and she called out sweetly, "Ai. Mother." The little one's soft voice attracted the attention of many parents. When they saw the sweet and adorable little Amy with a pair of pigtails, their eyes lit up immediately. "This little girl is so cute. Mother, she's the Amy I told you about." She's the one who knows super powerful magic. These parents are so lucky. Not only is this child beautiful, she's also super talented. Everyone turned their envious and jealous gazes toward Meg and Sally, who were standing at the door. The man was about 30 years old. He was wearing a black shirt and long pants. The style was very novel, and it was very obvious that he had a perfect figure. He had a handsome face, and a faint mustache above his upper lip. His eyes were warm and bright, and he made people feel that he was very approachable. The elf beside him looked like a young girl. Her slender figure was perfectly accentuated by the tight-fitting cheongsam that she was wearing, and her cold and beautiful face made people feel that she was unapproachable. The two of them stood at the door, and it was as if they were a pair of jade statues. They didn't wear any jewelry, nor did they exude any domineering aura, but they still made people unable to look away. "I'm impressed that they can give birth to such a child," a parent murmured. Many parents nodded reflexively. "You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.